Councilmember Douglas, can you hear us?
I can now, yes.
Outstanding, thank you.
Can you hear me? Obviously, yes, thank you.
This is a hybrid meeting of the City Council. Members of the public can view this meeting live on Channel 8 City's website and YouTube. Live Spanish translation services are being provided for tonight's council meeting by telephone. Please dial 720-386-9023 and use code 104091 *.
Se ofrecen servicios de interpretación en español para esta reunión del Consejo Municipal por teléfono. Marque el número 720-386-9023 y utilice el código 104091 #.
All right, let's get this study session underway. We're going to have a presentation on the review of the draft comprehensive plan. I'll invite Jennifer Jones, Planning Manager, to give the presentation.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I am very excited to be here with you tonight to discuss the draft comprehensive plan. It has been a long time coming, but we are excited to present it to you this evening. We do have our planning consultants here to begin the presentation, and staff is also available to answer questions. So without further ado, I will introduce the planning consultants from Housiel Levine. Mr. John Housiel will be beginning the presentation for you.
Thanks, Jennifer. You guys hear me okay? Or am I going to hit this? Is that better? All right. Mayor and City Council, thank you so much for having us here this evening. As Jennifer stated, we're excited to be here this evening. This meeting was a long time coming. This is to sort of present and walk you through the draft of the comprehensive plan, to orient you to what is in it, and to review with you what a comprehensive plan is, why the states require them, what is the purpose of a comprehensive plan, and what got us here this evening. Josh Coons, who is a senior planner with our firm and was the project manager, will then walk through the document sort of chapter by chapter to orient you to the comprehensive plan draft. You can ask questions at any point throughout the process or save them toward the end. We know you've got other things on the agenda, but we want to get through this. So with that, I'm just going to start jumping into this. The project team for the comprehensive plan was Housiel Levine Associates, was the lead firm, and we were joined by Tetra Tech, JR Engineering, and Tool Design, and of course the team from Commerce City, including the advisory committee, the technical advisory committee, and professional staff from the city. And I just want to stop a little bit to talk about some of the challenges that we are all aware of over the last few years that has caused this process to take a little bit longer than we had anticipated, not least of which was a global pandemic, which raised challenges for travel, for outreach, and other things, but we were able to mitigate those over the course of the project. The changing team makeup. We had an excellent working relationship with city staff throughout the entire process and continue to today. But a lot of those faces changed over the 3 years. And the faces we saw at the beginning of the project were not the faces we were working with at the end of the project. But luckily, we had to maintain that continuity of professional relationship and a real cohesive team throughout the project. So we were lucky to have that. Tetra Tech was environmental support. JR Engineering was infrastructure and transportation support. And Tool Design is active transportation, so bike, ped, transit, things like that. So that was the team that made up the project team. The agenda for what we want to go through over the next short period of time is what is a comprehensive plan, what's the point, and what's the purpose of having a comprehensive plan, the timeline and process overview, and orientation to the Commerce City 2045 comprehensive plan, and then to touch on the next steps. So first, we want to talk a little bit about what is a comprehensive plan, what's the point of having one, and why the city undertook this project, why do cities across the country undertake a comprehensive plan project. So I want to talk a little bit about this. In the 1920s, 1926 and 1928, the federal government passed 2 acts, the Standard State Zoning Enabling Act and the Standard State Planning Enabling Act. And these two things gave cities the authority through their state legislative, the ability to plan and zone for their cities. Comprehensive plans are required in all 50 states, although every state does it differently. On the East Coast, they call them POCDs, Plans of Conservation and Development. In Michigan, they call them master plans. In other states, they call them general plans. In some states, they call them comprehensive plans. A comprehensive plan is a long-range, 10 to 20-year planning document. It is not zoning. It is not regulatory. It does not dictate what you can and cannot do with your property. That's zoning. That's your land use development codes. A comprehensive plan is a foundation for decision-making. It is policy. It is aspirational. It is to give you a sense of what kind of uses and character of development you want throughout your community as you grow, what you want to conserve and protect, and what you want to change and develop going forward. The Colorado Revised Statutes 3028-106 and 3123-206 in the state of Colorado are why Commerce City undertook this comprehensive plan. So a comprehensive plan promotes the community's visions, goals, objectives, and policies, establishes a process for orderly growth and development, addresses both current and long-term needs, and provides a balance between the natural and the built environment. We started the process by looking at your current comprehensive plan. And I remember when we started this, I think some of you on the dais may even have been involved in that process. So Commerce City, the C3 Vision Comprehensive Plan is about 13 years old. Like I said, comprehensive plans are typically written for a 10 to 20-year horizon, but they are typically updated every 10 to 15 years. So they're written for a little bit longer period than the frequency in which they are updated. Many states require they're updated every 5 years in some states. Colorado does not have that specific requirement. So what is a comprehensive plan? Like I said, it's not regulatory, it's not zoning. It's a roadmap for the flood we're currently having outside right now. It's a roadmap or a blueprint for the future, for the next 2 decades. I think the best way to refer to this is it's a foundation for decision-making. When you are looking to prioritize capital improvement funds, when you are looking to review and evaluate a development proposal, when you are set to undertake a neighborhood or a housing study or stormwater mitigation plan, you use the comprehensive plan as a guide. I feel like this is some severe competition to compete with while speaking. A comprehensive plan should assess the city's existing issues and strengths. It should identify the desires, needs, and aspirations. It is a guide for a broad range of topics: transportation, land use, development, housing, infrastructure, environmental responsibility, culture, several different things. And it acts as a dynamic document. This is not set in stone. Things change over time. The comprehensive plan can be revisited and calibrated, and it needs to be over the next 10 to 20 years. Like I said, many states require that every 5 years it be revisited. Doesn't have to be reinvented, but they need to be revisited, double-checked on to make sure it's doing what it needs to do. So a comprehensive plan is essential. Every state requires them. It is a foundation for decision-making. For the elected officials, when somebody appears at this podium proposing a development, if your department heads come to you and say, we need to expend capital improvements to undertake these projects, it perfectly aligns with priorities of the comprehensive plan. It helps prioritize funding. One of the most important things a comprehensive plan does is it sets you up to pursue funding through grants, both federally and at the state level. One of the first things a grant program will say is what you're asking funding for consistent with your comprehensive plan? And if your answer is no, or we don't have a comprehensive plan, or our comprehensive plan is out of date, the likelihood of getting funding isn't as high. But if you can say, we thought about this, we had an extensive public process, this aligns with the priorities of our plan, we need this funding to get these projects done, your chances of getting that grant allocation go way, way up. So a comprehensive plan is an important document. A little bit about why we do comprehensive planning and why cities do them. To evaluate and inform development proposals. Commerce City is a growing community. You're going to get a lot of people standing here proposing development. You're going to get a lot of people meeting with your staff about development concepts before anything is pitched in this room. Staff, department heads, elected officials, appointed officials, plan commissions, et cetera, can use the comprehensive plan to inform those discussions, to help evaluate concepts for development. It's a foundation for the regulatory framework. Planning should come first. Zoning should come second. Zoning is not planning. Planning should set an aspiration for a community. This is what we hope to achieve along this corridor. You get consensus on that. Then you say, in order to see this realized over the next 20 years, we'd better go back and change our zoning. Then you go back and change your zoning to help deliver the recommendations of the plan. Planning is not led by zoning. Planning leads zoning. Zoning is a means by which to implement plan recommendations. That's one of the key things about a comprehensive plan. You articulate the type and character of development you want in the city of Commerce City and your growth areas. You coordinate local and regional initiatives. The county has planning. Your neighboring communities have comprehensive planning. And as these plans come online, they refer to one another. So you can have regional coordination to piggyback on grant applications, CIP, or development alignment. So to coordinate with local and regional initiatives is huge. The light rail system affected the region. Bicycle trails affect the region. Economics can also affect a region, not just a city. Some things don't stop at a municipal boundary. Environmental issues don't stop at a municipal boundary. So regional coordination is essential. This plan telegraphs your intent to other regional and local bodies. You support the CIP and budgeting. There are certain things in this comprehensive plan that are CIP related, capital improvement programming or capital improvement planning. What sidewalks do you prioritize to enable everybody to be able to walk to work or to get some healthy food? Is your mobility here individualized to be equitable across all areas of your community and in every neighborhood? That's CIP expenditure and CIP prioritization. The plan can help align that expenditure and priority funding to make sure that capital improvements help further the recommendations of the comprehensive plan. It's one of the key things that a comprehensive plan does. It also identifies future studies. The comprehensive plan is not the be-all, end-all. It's a pretty high-level review the state requires that you provide. But in doing so, you may uncover something that needs to be done. An infill redevelopment strategy for one of your core city neighborhoods. The comprehensive plan may not be able to get to that parcel by parcel strategic development, but it could call out the need for that. If we're going to see this neighborhood revitalized the way it needs to be, in keeping with enriched housing options and walkability, after this plan gets adopted, we better do what it says and go back and take a look at these neighborhoods and do some additional studies and some additional work. That's one of the reasons why we called out and did the character area approach as opposed to typical land use. And it's also why we did the 8 corridor frameworks as opposed to what we were contracted to do, which was just 3 sub-areas. I think it's another thing that expended the life of this process a little bit longer. Most comprehensive plans just look at land use. Single family, detached, large lot, residential. Single family, attached, residential. Corridor, commercial. Those are land uses. But single family, detached, single family homes does not describe a neighborhood. What about the parks? What about the schools? What about the townhouse or the duplex that's mixed in with those single family homes? That makes up a neighborhood. So we went and did a character area approach to planning, which is much more robust, much more prescriptive, and much more informing when you're evaluating improvements and evaluating possible development. It took longer to do, to dial it in. It was a lot more work, but we did, working with your staff, realize fairly early on that it was the right approach for Commerce City. Likewise, we went through the exercise of trying to identify the 3 sub-areas that we were scoped to do. The best way to think about a sub-area is it's the areas that are most likely to see pressure for development. Your stable, single-family neighborhoods, not a lot of pressure for redevelopment. Not like a corridor that has seen better days, right? Or an industrial corridor along E470 that is yet to be developed. That's going to see some change. So these are the areas that you want to do detailed sub-area planning. And we just couldn't zero in on 3. But we could capture most of those areas of likely change by doing the corridor frameworks for 8 different corridors. Again, it was a lot more than we were contracted to do, a lot more than we were scoped to do. But we came here and had a 2-day charrette with your staff. And the outcome of that 2-day planning session with your staff was we had to go this route to effectively plan and be responsive to the opportunities that we're facing Commerce City. And lastly, one of the things that a comprehensive plan does is to inform and educate the community. There's no other document, whether online or hard copy, and we've got a hard copy here, that encompasses as much as the comprehensive plan does in terms of where Commerce City is right now, what it is Commerce City hopes to achieve, and exactly what Commerce City is willing to do to make those things happen. That is all encapsulated in the comprehensive plan. It doesn't exist anywhere else. So it really is a means to inform and to educate the community if anybody's paying attention. So these are some of the key reasons we do comprehensive planning across the states. And this is the key reasons that Colorado requires them of certain cities, and this is why we undertook this project. What I'm going to do now is, so that I just wanted to lay out sort of what a comprehensive plan is, some of the circumstances that arose as we went through this project that required us to be nimble, that required us to be responsive. And it took a little bit more time, but the net result, the end result, was a plan that was specifically responsive to the needs and opportunities of Commerce City. And if something arose along the way that our initial scope would not allow us to get to, we recalibrated, expanded our scope a little bit to make sure we address things in a more comprehensive manner. And you have to be nimble. To think that you can get exactly right a scope of work and a timeline at the beginning of a 2-year project is tough when it's often guided by input you receive along the way. You've got to be responsive to that input. So proud of where we are today, but that's a little bit of background as to why we did it, how we did it, and why Commerce City undertook the project to begin with for comprehensive plan. What I'm going to do now is turn it over to Josh Kuntz, who was the project manager. Josh has been with us for several years. Josh has led several comprehensive plan projects across the country, including award-winning comprehensive plans here in the state of Colorado that won the APA award just last year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh to walk through the process in a little bit more detail and what is in the content of this document. Again, at any time you can ask questions, or we can get through the process of this overview presentation, and then you can ask us anything you want. So that's it.
Thanks, John. Good evening to the mayor and council. Again, just like John said, we're glad to be here and excited to be presenting this to you all. I'm just going to run a little bit through the process to recap what we've been doing over the past couple of years. 8-step process, but really we're focused on 3 things. First, establishing where Commerce City is today, thinking about where we want to go to the future, and then how are we actually going to get there? What are the steps that we're going to take to get there? So January to February 2021, we kicked this off virtually with the staff working group, with the technical advisory committee and the citizens advisory committee. We held an elected and appointed officials roundtable to introduce the process, and we prepared summaries of those workshops and posted them to the website. These were some of the first things we did after we established the website and the project branding and all of that. Right in step 2, initial push for community engagement. We prepared the detailed engagement plan, social media content, set up the project website that you see there on the right side of the screen, set up map.social, which is an online mapping and engagement tool that we prepared to solicit feedback for people who weren't able to participate in a more formal workshop. Prepared an online questionnaire and sent out do-it-yourself workshop kits so that anybody could conduct a workshop with the group they felt most comfortable with. We did a community-wide push in the months of March through August in 2021, including, again, because of the pandemic, virtual business workshops, 2 events there, community workshop series, developer and construction roundtable, a program of about 18 key stakeholder interviews with a variety of stakeholders in each of those interviews. And these were each conducted virtually due to the pandemic with translation and interpretation services available as needed. We did a series of visioning workshops, which included a Facebook Live component so that anybody just kind of scrolling through their Facebook feed could see what Commerce City was doing and tune in if they chose to do so. Staff came up with the idea of on-site participation boards, which you can see there on the right. Remember, this was a time when people were trying to do more things outside, and these were placed around the community at some of the various recreation centers to solicit additional feedback, answering questions like the future of Commerce City would be better if we, and then fill in the blank. And we got a lot of responses from those. We met with the Parks, Rec, and Golf Advisory Committee, and then staff embarked on a program of summer outreach in addition to what we'd already done to solicit more feedback. This whole first part of the process culminated in the market demographic analysis and existing conditions report. This really presented everything that we had done. Our team had been out in the community doing block by block existing conditions analysis, taking notes on existing land use, taking photos. And we put this together. Think of this almost as like the book report on Commerce City. Everything that our firm, Tetra Tech, JR Engineering, Tool Design Group, everything that we know, make sure that we have our heads on straight before we get into drafting vision, goals, core principles, policies, and recommendations. Once this went through a review process, this was posted to the website in December. And that really brought us to the where do we want to go in the future. Like John said, this is the aspirational part of the plan. All plans are aspirational. A way to think about it is to think, right there in the name, Commerce City 2045. Where would we be if we were able to jump ahead to 2045? What would we want our city to look like? The vision is the aspirational narrative that attempts to capture that. And then I'll talk a little bit about this later, but the plan includes broad, long-range, and ambitious goals, core principles, and objectives, the things that we can actually work on to move the needle on toward this aspirational vision. And this was about the time when we did that, came out in January 2022 for that staff planning team working session. And like John said, that was where we pivoted from the 3 sub areas to trying to capture more of the city and think about the city as a city of corridors. So connections, east to west, north to south. What does it look like to reinvest in some of these corridors that could use another look? In step 7, following the corridor frameworks and the review process that went along with that, we started to do the character areas, the character area approach to land use, which I'll cover a little bit more in depth in a minute here. Staff continued to do additional community outreach through summer and fall of 2022. And then we started to prepare the core elements, the housing chapter of the plan, the economic development chapter, working with JR and Tool, the transportation section of the plan, working with Tetra Tech, infrastructure, parks, rec, and open space. So those chapters that fit underneath that umbrella of future land use and character areas. And step 8 really brings us here tonight. We've had a couple of meetings. We had a meeting with Planning Commission. We've met with the TAC and the CAC. So we've already been getting some draft document feedback, and we're here tonight to review this with City Council. So what I want to do before we get into questions and answers is just give you a little bit of an orientation to the document. It's over 200 pages. It's not dense text, but there's a lot there. So how do you actually use a document like this when you're flipping through it? There's 13 sections of the plan. I'm going to skip past the first 3, intro, outreach and engagement, and community profile. Those are pretty straightforward if you flip to them. But really think of the plan framework, chapters 4 and 5, the where do we want to go portion of the plan. Vision, core principles, goals and objectives, and that overall umbrella of future land use, the character areas of the plan. And then the core elements and implementation, really, that's how are we going to get there? The policies, the recommendations, and the actions that the city can take to move toward this aspirational vision. So the plan framework, we're looking at chapters 4 and 5 here. This really sets the stage for the plan. Like I've said a couple times, where do we want to go in the future? Starts with a vision, the aspirational narrative for Commerce City. If we were able to be there in 2045, what do we want the city to look like? The goals, broad, long range, ambitious. And I like the illustration of a runner here. I use this a lot. Think of a 6-minute mile. That's an aspirational goal for any one of us in this room. Some like me, I'm turning 40 this year. I'm probably not going to hit a 6-minute mile anymore in my life. But it's something that I reasonably could take good actions to work toward. I could start eating more healthy. I could get more sleep. I could wake up early and run every day. Those are actions that are good for me to do, and it makes the goal worthwhile to work towards. So every goal may not be fully realized in a comprehensive plan. They should be ambitious, but they should be something that the city can take reasonable steps to work toward. The core principles, I'll show you a slide in a second, but these thread across all of the plan chapters. The values of the Commerce City community. They cut across policies, they cut across recommendations. They're not just about transportation, they're not just about housing. They're 4 core principles that thread throughout the document. And then at the vision, goal, core principle level, we have objectives that are those specific actions, and those are fleshed out later when we get into the core elements of the plan. So chapter 4 looks like this. You have the community vision statement, which is there on the right, and then you get into the core principles. So the 4 core principles that we worked on based on community outreach, our scope of work, the planning session with staff, everything that we heard up to this point, all those months of work, we came upon these 4: welcoming an equitable city, a safe, healthy, and livable city, an economically thriving city, and an environmentally responsible city. So these 4 are presented in the vision and goals chapter, and then you'll see how they are applied throughout the document. The goals and objectives are also presented concisely in this chapter. So you can see the example here on the right, a goal for 3 goals for transportation and the objectives that fit underneath. So if you just want to know what are the top goals for transportation, you turn here. If you want to dig deeper into the policies and recommendations for transportation, you flip to the transportation chapter. Character areas, like John said, not a typical land use plan, not an old way of doing land use. These focus on place rather than a parcel-specific land use, and define more of that collective mix that makes up a neighborhood, a district, an area. Think of it as like a palette that you're painting with, and what are the ingredients that are going into a character area. So you can see an old way of doing land use. You might just have a big yellow area on a map, and it would say, this is single-family detached. These are where all our single-family detached homes are. This area over here is where all our high-density residential areas are. These are our duplexes. And sometimes what you get is a land use map that's your future land use map and is sort of piecemeal and just doesn't really provide good direction. But a character areas map, for example, and these aren't necessarily Commerce Cities categories, but think about a suburban residential neighborhood. That connotates some single-family residential homes, some attached homes perhaps on a corner on a busy corridor, there may be a small apartment building, and maybe there's a corner store mixed in there, or maybe there's a park or a school. The things that really make up a neighborhood. Mixed residential neighborhood, maybe there's some more increased density, maybe it's a little closer to transit and there's opportunity for some additional townhomes or duplexes or something like that. This place-based approach really gives decision makers like yourselves some flexibility when you're coming in and you're reviewing a development proposal. If a developer comes in and says, I just want to put 100 single-family homes here. Well, where are those other components that make up a neighborhood? And it's also translated easily to zoning. So when you look at your zoning code, you have those districts, and are you missing a district that can help you achieve that mixed residential character? A true neighborhood, not just a sprawl of townhomes or duplexes. This is what the character areas land use map looks like. So you can see there's 13 character areas spread across the city. And what we did is we defined those alongside the land uses that make them up. So there's a handy table right at the start of this chapter. So if you're wondering what goes into the central neighborhoods character area, you can see, well, there's some single family homes. There's some attached homes and duplexes and townhomes. There's parks and gathering spaces, open space, public gathering areas. Of course, there's utilities. Those are the primary land uses, and then the white diamond, those are the black diamonds, and then the white diamonds there are the secondary land uses. So it may be appropriate long-term to see some office or some multifamily residential that might fit within here. Should have had this one up. You can see it a little bit better. Just another example, the DIA Gateway District. So the uses at the right, parks and open space, public gathering spaces, utilities, warehousing and distribution in proximity to the airport, that makes sense. Primary employment areas, the places where people are going to work. And then the secondary land uses, there may be some residential areas that are appropriate along the, there may be some office and commercial retail uses that are appropriate in the DIA Gateway District. Each one of these 13 character areas that you see here has a page in the document that's devoted specifically to explaining what it is. So you can see, just to orient you to this page, you can see a locator map at the top. So where is the Community Connection District? You can see it in red on the map of the overall city. The list of primary and secondary uses. Long-term, are there any uses that would not be appropriate? Those are under the excluded uses. And then a few of these have what we would call points of special consideration, and those are called out in the purple box below. So if you're evaluating a proposal within this Community Connection District or along the E470 Expressway corridor, where there's a lot more open land development potential, you can take a look. Does this proposal generally fit with this page of our comprehensive plan? And these pages are specific to Commerce City. They're not out of a dictionary of land uses. They don't just say single-family residential. You can evaluate this and make informed decisions looking at this page of the document and say, does this proposal really fit with the direction that we said we wanted to go with the Commerce City 2045 Comprehensive Plan? Moving on from the overall character areas, the land use portion of the document, these are the core elements: connected corridors, commerce and employment, housing and neighborhoods, arts, culture and tourism, transportation and mobility, parks, open space and the environment, and public facilities and infrastructure. I'm not going to go through every one of these, but I want to highlight two of these chapters real quickly. First, the connected corridors. You'll remember, again, that was a pivot from 3 sub-areas to 8 corridors. And then the housing and neighborhoods, I just want to highlight as an example of one of these chapters. How do you use one of these chapters? So the connected corridors core element does kind of stand alone in the way that it's presented. It's very graphically rich. From what we heard in outreach and what we discussed with working with staff and with the core team, we identified these 8 corridors that needed detailed planning attention as part of this process. So you can see the 8 corridors there, and I'm going to zoom in a second on one of them to show you what that looks like. But the toolkit approach, think of when you go to do a project in your house and you grab your toolbox and there's all different tools in there, but you maybe only need the hammer and the level. So these are the tools for the connected corridors. They may apply in some aspect, in some way to each of these. They could be applied to all of them. There could be gateways established on 72nd Street as well as on E470, for example. Think of this as like the menu of improvements that could apply to each one of these 8 corridors. But we get a little more detailed than that. So when you take a look at 72nd Avenue, there's also what we call local area improvements. So these are more specifics to this particular corridor framework. Things like lot assembly. So if the opportunity arises, there may be you may be able to assemble lots and prepare some sort of catalytic development along 72nd Street. Specific undeveloped areas. The Quebec Street, which runs parallel to the Parkway. These are some of the specific things that we called out in a really detailed way for the 72nd Avenue corridor. And we did these for all 8 corridors, and each one is unique and different and specific to that corridor. And then just to highlight a more typical core element of the comprehensive plan, this is the cover page for housing and neighborhoods. You can see the introduction to the chapter, the sort of the vision, if you will, for housing and neighborhoods, and then how do the core principles apply to housing and neighborhoods? What about housing would make Commerce City welcoming and equitable? What about housing would make it environmentally thriving? So we're pulling in those core principles back into the core elements and showing how they connect to each policy and recommendation in the plan. The residential areas framework, these are areas these fit within and underneath that overall character areas map. These are the areas within those character areas. Remember, the character areas are a mix of land uses. These are areas that would be residential within those character areas. So we're starting at a high level, we're drilling down a little deeper, and we're providing policies and recommendations specific to the city's established and future residential areas. You can see things like creative housing types, definition of accessory dwelling units and how they can really benefit a part of the community that may need more housing options. And then specific recommendations that fit underneath each one of these headings. The headings come out of the goals, the recommendations come out of the objectives. Josh, I have a question for you. Sure.
Dennis Kamak, I'm on the Planning Commission.
Yep.
These are good directions for the use of the land, but for building a community, it takes more than just land planning. It takes you need rooftops, you need an income, which is your economic development, and then the amenities. In the various character areas, I didn't see a lot of connection with what we want to do with what we have to do in economic development in order to cause that to happen. You can build all the houses in the world, but that doesn't make a good community. We've already got a bedroom community here. Where does the how to do it connect with what we need to do from an economic development standpoint, not just planning what kind of houses we're going to build?
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's a good question. So I'm highlighting the housing and neighborhoods chapter here. We also have the drawing a blank, the commerce and employment chapter, which really is another name for the economic development chapter of the comprehensive plan. So the policies and recommendations that are specific to the city's commercial and industrial areas and to economic development.
The way I read that, it doesn't really connect with the character area concept. As an example, we need more jobs in the North End.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just like with this chapter, and I don't have this up on the screen, but we can look at pages of the plan after the presentation here. But just like with this chapter, the economic development framework provides a map showing where those areas are going to be long-term. You'll see areas along E470 where there's anticipated new employment and new retail. And what the city can do is identify on a map where long-term it wants those areas to be. What are the policies and recommendations? Who is it going to partner with to work toward those types of developments? And when a proposal comes forward, is it generally meeting with the direction of the comprehensive plan? Another thing, like John said, is you have an economic development chapter of your plan, and again, the whole plan here operates at a higher level, and you can drill down. There may be a need to dive deeper into an economic development strategic plan, a whole nother specific plan that really can take a deep dive into the market and the economics facing the city and can fit underneath the comprehensive plan and provide that more detailed direction. And I'll show you at the end also when we get into the implementation section of the plan. So that's going to pull out all these actions, those things that the city, you remember the 6-minute mile, the things that the city can actually do, partner with, and work toward to achieve some of these economic development goals that are presented in that chapter. So there are things that the city can actually do to move the needle and to realize economic development, for example. So it's presented just like this chapter, and we can take a look at it too as afterwards if you like. Is that helpful?
I have a follow-up question. I'm looking at the Commerce and Employment chapter, and the picture is Suncor, and I was wondering why there isn't more creativity when it comes to commerce and employment. That is what is, but it's certainly not visionary. It certainly doesn't take us out beyond 2030, 2040. The state is moving away from that, and this seems inadequate to me.
Yeah, each one of these chapters, and you'll see here, I think, I don't have the cover image for housing neighborhoods, but they're all, each chapter cover image is an oblique aerial sort of image. But yeah, we can consider zooming in on a different part of the community. That's easy to do. If you dig deeper into the economic development chapter, you'll find that it's not all about Suncor, that's for sure.
It is unfortunately what is highlighted.
Okay.
And the issue for me about what is highlighted is that it's not listening to the community, but I'll get to that when you're finished with your presentation. Thank you.
So sticking with the example chapter here of housing and neighborhoods, one of the things that's important in any planning process, and John showed you the cover image of your 2010 plan. No good planning process throws out all the past plans or wipes the slate clean. The city has done a lot of good planning, sub-area planning, your Irondale neighborhood plan. You think about your the plan around the station area, and even your 2010 plan still has some things that are relevant and applicable today. So this concept, this notion of neighborhood villages. In 2010, that's what the city talked about, locating housing that are housing near commercial areas so people have options so that they don't have to get in their car for everything, providing walkable access to a variety of amenities. This process carries that forward. That really closely aligns with a planning concept of complete communities that's still alive and well today. And you might see call-out boxes throughout the document that present things like that. So where are we tying back to a previous plan or something else that the city has done in the past that's still relevant? And then lastly, just as part of this overall orientation to the plan document, the implementation section. Often we kind of look back and smile at those old plan documents that were just a land use plan and 400 pages of text, and they sat on the planner's shelf and were trotted out to write memos to the board or to council. And really, that is not what a good comprehensive plan should be. If it's specific to the community and if it's about Commerce City, this chapter should be one of the first that anybody should turn to understand what's in this document. So one of the first things that any city can do is update the zoning, and we discussed that here as one of the first implementation actions. Using the comprehensive plan to inform your capital improvements planning. Where are you going to spend money in the short term when you do that short-term planning year after year, your 5-year plans? Regular updates, like John said, we're looking out over 20 years, long range, but we have a plan, but we don't have a crystal ball. So you may find something in 2 years from now, a new development that comes in along E470, a major employment center or industrial park or commercial development that this plan really didn't anticipate and is maybe in an area that's marked future residential. You may need to update your plan as these opportunities arise, and that's appropriate to do so. Like John said, this is a policy guide. It's not the law. One of the things that comes up in every community, and it came up here, is the schools. People choose to locate in places because of the schools, and it's a big reason why people choose to spend their money and invest in a community and purchase a home. And in every community across this country, the schools are not under the city's jurisdiction directly. They're a partner, and there's a lot of partners like that. We had many of these partners represented on the TAC as we worked through this process. So the things that the city can't directly impact, it's going to need a partner to get things done, and we identify that list of partners here. And then lastly, if you're just telling somebody to turn to just two sections of the comprehensive plan, the overall character areas map, and then the implementation matrix. So any action in the plan, any recommendation in the plan is distilled down just to its core action here and listed. So every recommendation under every chapter is listed here. It's assigned a time frame, so that could be helpful when you're looking at the CAP, ease of accomplishment at the city level, and then one of those core principles, or one or more of those core principles, how do they apply to that specific action? One of the communities we're working in uses this core principle, guiding principle approach to evaluate development proposals. So if somebody comes in, the developer has to check off, how are you matching up alongside our core principle of welcoming an equitable city? Are you ticking that box with your development proposal? Is this proposal moving the needle on environmentally sustainable city, for example? So every recommendation that's in those previous 200 pages is listed here in the implementation action matrix. And I guess with that, I assume there's going to be some questions, so we can take questions, and either John or I can answer those.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that presentation. Does anybody have any questions at this time? Councilmember Noble.
Thanks. Appreciate the presentation. I have a lot of questions. I've read through this. I'm wondering, under Colorado Code 31-23-206, it says this is to be prepared by the Planning Commission. Could you describe your involvement with the Planning Commission of Commerce City?
The Planning Commission is the recommending body that will recommend this document for adoption. We've had several meetings with them along the way.
You have. Okay, under community involvement data, how many responses would you say over the past 3 years?
Yeah, that's still being tabulated. It was a wide net approach. So when we met with the city and interviewed and contracted, this was all, all that initial outreach was supposed to be in-person meetings, a series of visioning workshops, and it just was not possible at that time. You all
Okay.
remember that.
Yeah,
So,
then that makes me ask another question, though. Are you familiar with community reference system?
not directly, you might,
You're
maybe
not?
if you describe it a little bit.
Okay. A community reference system would be perfect during a pandemic. So you say to the 9 council people and you say to the 5 planning commissioners and their alternates, name 5 people that we should interview because we're doing the comprehensive plan. And then you interview those 5 people and you say to those 5 people, name 5 people. And you come up with a community reference system that tells you who has their ears to the ground and knows what's going on in the community and knows what is important. Otherwise, if you're not talking to the community, then you're providing us with a document that doesn't reflect what we've heard residents say they want. I was part of the early webinar kind of things that occurred, and I don't see that reflected. I don't see what people asked for and said that they wanted. I see some version by people who have planning experience, but not people who have relationships with the community. How many unique respondents and participants were there?
Let me just take that last one first, if
Sure.
I could. So I guess there's there's two things. Any comprehensive plan needs to weigh the feedback from lots of individuals. I don't think any comprehensive plan, when you get to this point in adoption, I don't think any one person sees 100% of what they said in a document. That would be long and probably a little bit disjointed. The other thing is that a comprehensive plan has to marry what we heard from community outreach with planning best practices, the analysis of the community, the existing conditions analysis, what we know from hard data, like the demographics research that we did, census data, looking at tools like CoStar, Esri Business Analysts, that we get a firm understanding of the community that's not just word of mouth. I don't have in front of me the total number of participation. What the draft has in it is still a draft, but staff took on a ton of work and talked to, as I understand it, thousands of people across the community and sent out newsletters, and it all tabulated up to quite a large number. And Jennifer, I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but
Yes, ma'am.
Thousands, you just said?
Yes,
Were there
ma'am.
thousands that
Yes, ma'am.
responded?
So I appreciate you asking that question. We've been tracking the outreach throughout this process, which is quite extensive. So I do have a full breakdown of everything from Citizens Advisory Committee meetings, technical advisory group meetings, outreaches at concerts in the park, outreaches at the rec centers. We do have a variety of tabulations. Just a few numbers for examples. There was direct community engagement with 95 students within the community. We had workshops and correspondence with our development community. Again, our Music in the Park series, this is going on the third summer that we've been doing that. We have done extensive social media.
Yeah, but I'm looking for the actual touches, not where the event took place. What were the touches? How many touches did you have with actual residents of Commerce City, or even developers for that matter too, business people, anybody? What were the touches?
Sure. So if these numbers include, again, I can do a full breakdown, but these numbers do include website clicks and things like that, also including the connected mailers. And if you take a number of those into account, it's in the 36,000 range as of this week, which that number obviously continues to grow.
Okay, well, 36,000 is a lot of people.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't know 36,000 people that were involved in this, so that's really good. I'm looking at the implementation action matrix under one of our principles, the one with the leaves, and there's nothing marked off. It doesn't look like any of the implementation actions have anything to do with the environment in any fashion. Is there anything, any action planned for the environment? I'm looking at the matrix that's on the screen here.
this is one page of the matrix. I think it's almost probably 15 or 20 pages long. So this is just one example page.
Okay. Are there bike corridors in this?
There are, yes.
And where is 120th? I didn't see that as one of the major corridors.
One of the connected corridors for the, are you talking about one of the corridors that we studied in section 6 of the plan?
Yeah, it's not one of the roads called out on the map.
I don't believe that was one of the 8 that was selected for this process.
Okay, and I notice that under your character areas, east of Highway 2, so that's the railroad tracks, east of Highway 2 is a mix of housing types. That's next to a railroad that carries oil and gas tanks to Suncor. And that's an interesting, so you can see it up there, 2, Highway 2, the yellow is housing, and that's right along a railroad track.
just to reiterate, each one of these is a mix of land uses, not just residential areas. So the central neighborhoods incorporate, I think I don't have that slide up here, but a variety of land uses, including parks, schools, commercial nodes. So it's not just housing.
And there were only 3 areas where large residential was allowed. 3 character areas where large residential was allowed. The North Airport District, South Platte, and I'm not remembering the third. My recollection is that South Platte was, okay, that's not on that list. Oh, there it is, large residential lot. There it is, South Platte, Innovation District, and North Airport District are listed as large lot residential. Do you know why they would be large lot residential when they're in commercial areas or industrial areas?
So if you, a little bit of future land use is what are the future patterns? Remember, we're looking out to 2045, 20 plus years, but there are some established residential areas. So when we're talking about, for example, the North Airport District 12, you can see it there. See that sliver up in the top right, 12 right there. So there are some established large lot residential, rural homes that are out there. So yeah, calling it the Northern Airport District doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be airport development.
I think it's our understanding that that's going to be an area where there can't be any more houses because it's the airport.
Are you talking about due to noise contours and things like that?
Right.
We did take a look at the noise contours and overlay those. And you can see, for example, character area 10, DIA Gateway District, firmly in those noise contours, and no residential uses permitted.
Okay, and when,
John, I just want to point out, if you go back to the implementation section, John just mentioned we have 74 environmentally sustainable communities related actions with the LEAF in that implementation section.
there has been talk of a hotel at 96th and Tower on the east side, but there is no, in this plan, that wouldn't be feasible. There wouldn't be, that's not one of the allowable uses.
96th and,
Tower, on the east side of Tower.
so I think if I'm looking at that right, that would be in the E470 Expressway Corridor District, number 9 there, that red strip that lies along E470.
It would be on Tower Road, not E470.
But it's within the E470 Expressway Corridor District. If you take a look at
I'm
this
looking
map.
at Tower Road on that.
Right.
Josh, if I may add just quickly, so as a reminder, in opposition to the current future land use plan, which is very single land use specific, the character areas are intended to be more of a form, function, and feel. So with there are a few exclusions, typically industrial excluded in residential areas, but there is a lot of flexibility built into the character area design so that each individual project can be evaluated by City Council based on its own merits and how it meets or doesn't meet the overall character area. And so these colors, again, it's different from our current plan, but these colors are not intended to be a like-for-like future land use and zoning. And so there's a lot of language in here that speaks to, at arterial corners, that's where certain types of commercial development is most appropriate, even in areas that are neighborhood-centric. And so this design is really intended to allow each of those decisions to be made by council versus is the color right, yes or no? Right.
I'm looking at, Jennifer, the north neighborhoods, and it says that hospitality is excluded. And if this is supposed to be a general guideline, then that's not a problem. But it's very specifically written and has all these tables in it that call out different uses and exclude different uses. So I just want us to all be very careful about what it is that we are agreeing to. And particularly since so much of it I don't see reflected from the meetings that we had in 2021 with the residents. That's all I have now. Thank you.
I appreciate that comment about hospitality. I know that we had worked with you all on some of those definitions. We'll certainly double check those definitions. There is some overlap between commercial, hospitality, travel specifically. So that's a great catch, and we can certainly ensure that there's no confusion as we recognize hotels are certainly desirable in that corridor.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate in a different way what Jennifer just said is that this is still in draft. So if there's a deal breaker land use that needs to be included in northern neighborhoods or in E470 Expressway Corridor District, for example, that's something that we can evaluate. It may be appropriate there, and we may not have considered it. Draft till adopted.
I don't think we should exclude 120th by any stretch.
The other thing we can do, and to be in mind, even though we're seeing colors on a map, we could always take that E470 Expressway Corridor District and say we moved it over, and Tower Road maybe be the border of that. So we can shift the red over. So the idea is if you look at the character areas, you get a sense of what it is the city is trying to accomplish in an area. Giving those objectives and aspirations, is a proposed development appropriate given this? So, but another thing is to not only change the permitted primary or supporting uses in the matrix as a suggestive matrix to give a sense of character and intensity, you could also shift where that line is between northern neighborhood and E470 if we need to move that a little bit further over to the west to hit Tower Road all the way down to 96. That's another way to pick up that intersection. So you can make little adjustments like that, but because this is intentionally not parcel specific, if there is a proposed use right on the cusp of where two colored lines are, you can say, well, this development, even though it's just on the other side of where the color is, really is going to be part of the character of the adjacent larger area, so it's appropriate given where it's proposed. So these aren't parcel specific adjacencies. So if we need to shift the northern neighborhood a little bit or shift the E470 corridor over a little bit, we can do that to pick up a major intersection. So that's another way to increase flexibility around a key arterial.
I think what was most important to people was to have neighborhoods that have walkability with retail, bicycles, et cetera. There isn't anything, if you look at this map, there isn't anything that would signal to anyone that that was taken into account. And I think that's what I find disturbing, is that I can't say with confidence to constituents of Ward 4 that what it is that they want for their area is actually reflected.
And all I would say is this, is we're looking at one map, and the comprehensive plan is truly comprehensive. And even in a traditional, parcel-specific land use one, if you're looking at the land use map, you're seeing single-family, multifamily, industrial. You're not seeing any transportation or walkability on there. You're seeing land use. So on the map we were just looking at, it's character areas. But if you go to those character areas and the transportation chapters, it talks about pedestrian mobility and vehicular mobility and being able to cross intersections. So everything isn't contained on every page, but as a total document, the idea of walkability and pedestrian safety and mobility is in multiple places throughout this plan. They're not all on that one map. That's primarily a land use centric character area map. All the other supporting stuff comes in all the other chapters or in the character area page devoted to that character area type, where we get into form, function, mobility, use, character, aesthetic. That's just a map of the character area. So that's not all going to be captured on that map. You may have to cross-reference a couple other chapters of the plan.
This comprehensive plan cost $750,000. That's what was approved in 2021.
Right.
by this city council. And I think that to have expectations for our community is reasonable, and especially have expectations for our residents who participated and what they've indicated all along that they were looking for, I think is reasonable as well, because this should be visionary. It's supposed to last the next 40 years. And that's what I want to be able to see, is the vision that Commerce City is showing our community to say, this is what Commerce City is and will be.
Right. Just a couple points of clarity, and we may disagree on things, that's fine. This is the city's plan, it's not ours. That $700 and some odd thousand was not for the comprehensive plan. It was for 4 separate plans. Comprehensive plan, transportation master plan, parks, recreation, and golf master plan, and an economic development strategic plan. The comprehensive plan had a small portion of that total budget. I think it was just shy of like 188,000 or something. Yeah, so it was less than half of that. It was like about a quarter of that overall budget, a little more. So that was the budget for 4 plans. This is just one of the 4. It's not all of them. And to do the 8 corridors instead of 3 sub-areas, to do the character areas instead of land use, we went well beyond what the scope and what we were contracted to do, because when we got into it, we realized in order for this to be really responsive to what we were hearing, we had to go that extra mile. So if we had the full $700,000 budget, we could do additional corridors, we could do more stuff. But what we've got is beyond what we were scoped and contracted to do. And what we were scoped and budgeted to do for the comprehensive plan was not $700 and some odd thousand. This is just one of the 4 plans that was approved under one umbrella contract. So that's just a point of clarification.
Councilmember Chacon?
Thank you for your presentation. I have a couple concerns when it comes to equity framework. Of the 4 plans, have you done an analysis of environmental justice for disproportionately impacted communities, like cumulative impacts of known environmental justice issues since it's land use?
I guess what type of analysis are,
There's EnviroScreen from CDPHE, knowing if there's water quality issues, just knowing since it's land access issues, is there outdoor equity issues, things like that, that specifically pertains to disproportionately impacted communities.
there are certainly more detailed environmental impact studies that a city could take at the comprehensive plan level when we're talking about land use. That's not something that this plan was scoped to do.
That's kind of why it concerns me for equity, though, is because planning by capital normally creates gentrification for disproportionately impacted communities. So was there any type of analysis that, though we're transforming these spaces by capital, that we don't also increase displacement for communities that need their equity issues met?
Sure, that's really important. So when you look at things like this page that's right in front of you, recognizes that there's a need for to work to help the homeless population, the population experiencing homelessness. Walkable neighborhoods, that people shouldn't have to get in their car to drive everywhere, contribute to the environmental issues that you're talking about, have the opportunity to walk to a park in their neighborhood. People who need income from their property, the opportunity to develop an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit. That's something that came specifically out of outreach that we heard. There should be those opportunities to get more value out of my property. It's spread throughout this plan, the types of policies and recommendations that you're talking about. And you're absolutely right that, like John said, this should not be a House Levine plan, City of Commerce city plan. This really needs to be a plan specifically for the community. And if you read this document, you'll find that throughout.
I see some data gaps if that's the case, though, because if you're only looking at homeowners, you're not looking at the renters or those struggling that might not be able to participate in outreach directly, especially if they're Spanish speaking. That's a continual reciprocity to say that we also have water filter issues or a number of other things. And if 120th is already left out, that's one of the most dangerous roads that honestly needs public transportation or land access in that space. So I do see some gaps already there. How can we remedy those now?
Let me just clarify something. 120th is not left out of the study area of this project at all. 120th, where it passes through the limits of Commerce City, is still studied. It's It's part of the transportation section of this plan. But when we talk about those detailed corridor frameworks, those 8 corridor frameworks, it doesn't get that treatment, but it's still within the city and it still receives planning policies and recommendations for the areas around 120th. And there's general policy and recommendation, just like you see here for housing, the same type of content and recommendations for improving the city's transportation network is in the transportation section of the document. Again, we're just looking at two of these parts of 2 of these chapters, because I don't think you want me to go through all 12 of the chapters here tonight. But if you flip over to chapter 10 and take a look at transportation and mobility, you'll see transportation policies and recommendations, things for bikeability, walkability, pedestrian access, safe intersections. Sure, Jeff.
Yeah. Councilmember, just to reiterate, one of the things that Josh said is that after we're done with this plan, we'll be rolling into a transportation master plan, which will take the general stuff in the transportation planning, do much more focus on specific roadways, the whole network, transit, use of transit, micro-transit, and those sorts of things. So this is intended to be a general overview. Those details will come. Same thing with environmental. You know, we just adopted the sustainability plan, and if you go through the implementation chapter, you'll see several things in there about adopting a sustainability action plan. At the time we put that together, we didn't know that we were going to be ahead of this with that. So there are other more detailed elements. Economic development strategy is underway now. That's another one that was part of this, but is moving forward separately now, and was always intended to be separate, but we had to wait until after we got the general framework about ready to be able to do that. So we've got these other elements. Park and Recreation Master Plan is also one that's going on. So there were several, as John and Josh said, several other plans that are pieces of this that are now being, now that we're to this stage, are now being worked on.
So that'll include like a health and safety impact, like things like that, not just capital and expenditures?
I'm sorry, I
guess-
didn't understand you.
I guess my concern is the community feedback. The biggest community feedback is that we know of expenditures and resources, but if it doesn't start concerning health and safety and pollution issues, so the transportation also doesn't include where there's been pollution impacts or other things to communities, it doesn't prioritize the equity for disproportionately impacted communities already living here before we do these transformations.
Yes, ma'am. I mean, that's what, we're revising the scope a little bit now. Mr. Poe and Mr. Maxwell are working on that, and we absolutely want to make sure we include those kind of details. Just like with the sustainability plan, had a great deal of community involvement around, environmental justice and those kind of issues. We'll do that, and the Parks and Rec Master Plan, Parks and Rec Department is working with their consultant to drive a lot of engagement to get to those details.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay.
And I think it's worth saying that if you do look within the document, there are obviously goals and principles that outline environmental justice and health as a core principle, as a focus when it comes into these much broader areas. And then there's a much more defined conversation around sustainability, land use regulations, environmental health as it relates to reduction of various impacts with air and water quality. So you will find those woven throughout the various sections within the comp plan as well. Once again, as we start to jump into these other documents, like Mr. Tober said, that will allow for us to really start to pinpoint into those actionable steps and strategies.
My biggest concern then for equity is that we don't contribute to displacement of communities, because it's always been a space that's been affordable, but it's only affordable because of pollution zones. So just that type of mindfulness while we're making these transformations.
You know, one of the benefits, and one of the great things about our housing here is we have a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing. And as we worked on the housing chapter, we talked a lot about how do we not create gentrification, how do we not lose that? And I think that, there's some principles to guide what we do, allow people to put an accessory dwelling unit in to help them stay in their home or help have family members, and that sort of thing are recommended. But I think we absolutely hear you, and as we go through transportation planning, it's going to be about connecting communities, not breaking them apart, and trying to get them better access, better sidewalks, better access to schools, to jobs, to get to transit. Those type of things will be a more detailed focus of that part of the plan.
Thank you, Liv.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Douglas.
Thank you, Mayor Huseman. Thank you for recognizing that I had my hand up. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. You said it was a draft until it's adopted. How is it going to be determined that it's adopted? And then I'd also like to know if this will be accessible to the community and if they will be able to weigh in before adoption.
So I didn't share my next step slide yet, but the next step will be, to incorporate any feedback that this body and the various meetings that we've had so far since this May 19 draft was put together, incorporate that feedback where it's needed, update the document, and then we'll bring it to Planning Commission for recommendation, and ultimately City Council is the body that adopts the document as the city's new comprehensive plan. The staff has been rolling this out publicly. It's been available on the website and through a variety of other avenues for the public to review it and weigh in since May 19th, I believe, when the draft was first sent over.
Has that been publicized like in the Connected or?
Yes, ma'am, it has. We've also put posters and flyers at city facilities, and we have been promoting it through the social media as well as the Concerts in the Park series. So it has been available for a month, 6 weeks or so now. We're available for any comments or questions. It's also gone out to all the various advisory groups. But yes, from a very general perspective, it's available on the website for anyone that would like to review it. And again, we have been promoting that we've been using a QR code. So if you see any of those posters or flyers around, that's what that's about.
Okay, so are there instructions for people who don't have access to the internet and a computer to be able to participate as well?
Yes, ma'am. It also has a phone number and email. If anyone needed anything from us, we could certainly provide that.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Commissioner Kamick?
Josh, tell me how much or what interaction you've had with the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I mean, we're going back a couple of years now, but I think the Planning Commission has seats on is it the CAC, right?
So the CAC has been separate than our Planning Commission, with the exception of Mr. Kamak.
Right. So through your seat on the CAC, and I'd have to look back for what specific Planning Commission meetings we've had. We did review the draft with them a few weeks ago.
There's been a variety of joint study sessions.
Variety, like
Yes, ma'am.
2, 5, 12? 3 years?
Let's see.
How many?
I see 3 at quick glance at a minimum.
It's probably pretty close.
Also provided some updates to the Planning Commission over the
Right.
as the plan progressed.
Yeah. Have you had any personal interaction with the planning, and I was off of the Planning Commission for a little over a year, but I was on there the first couple years while we were doing this. In fact, on the very first call that we had the Zoom call initially, one of the conversations was that the southern part, the central part of Commerce City has very different problems and very different solutions than the northern part. And that was kind of put aside in that conversation that, yeah, we'll look at that, and then it was brought up again in one of the subsequent Zoom calls that we had. Personally, I like the idea of the character areas because it gives you the opportunity to do that. But you said just a couple minutes ago that some of the solutions were by character areas. And, you know, I've got all 26 pages of the recommendations here. I don't see most of those recommendations broken out by character areas and specifically the economic development part. which is really a huge part of the problem of the Northern Range. If we don't get employment up there, the tax base is going to drive people crazy, and we're going to have a lot of problems that are starting to dwell and already have been existence. Why hasn't that been put together? I mean, is there a reason, or is it an oversight? I mean, if this is going to be a dream plan, then why can't we get down not only what we need, but how to do it? I mean, an important part of what John said was that, it has specific actions. I personally don't, and these people have heard my viewpoint on economic development for a decade. I don't see much connection with economic development for the Northern Range in this plan, number one. Number two, is economic development part of a comprehensive plan, do you think?
I guess I'll try to take these in order. I mean, I do remember that conversation that we had. When we, if you take a look at our existing conditions report, we pulled down community data from a variety of sources, citywide, not just the Northern Range versus the central neighborhoods. And we looked at all that stuff, and yeah, I do think that the character areas approach really does a good job of getting at the differences. If you took an old school land use map from the 1960s and put modern Commerce City in there, those areas would just be both yellow, single family neighborhood. It wouldn't recognize the difference between the street grid and the way that parks and commercial nodes are interspersed, and the way that they're developing differently over time. But that said, this document is a citywide document. When you get into the economic development chapter of the plan, the commerce and employment, chapter 7, right there in the middle up top, those policies and recommendations are generally citywide. I think some of them are more specific to specific areas. I couldn't, without having the chapter in front of me, I couldn't point out those. But yeah, we are looking citywide, and there may be an opportunity or a toehold in one of those actions in the implementation section that helps the city tee off a more detailed study for, what does economic development mean up there along E470, where there's, endless opportunity near one of the country's busiest airports. And how does that differ from nodal neighborhood economic development at the neighborhood scale and a traditional grid in the central neighborhoods? There may be a level of detail that an economic development strategic plan and study needs to get at that just doesn't make sense at a city.
Have you involved the Planning Commission in the economic development study that you're doing?
I'm sorry, the what?
Have you involved the Planning Commission in the economic development package that you're doing? Not in the comprehensive plan, but the separate plan.
Sure. The economic development strategy is just kicking off, and they will absolutely, because it's part of this, they will be involved in the strategy. Again, the commerce and employment is a general overview here. If you recall, we met a couple of times with BREDAC as we were going through that to get their guidance. The character areas in the Northern Range character area is very specific about, and it does address the need and policies around retail, entertainment, the kind of things that the community said they want to see in the that northern area. The E470 is completely different with another set of kind of uses. But again,
I know that, we know that, but it's not written down.
no, it is. What I'm telling you, it is written down in the plan. It's not in the presentation, but it's in the 200-plus pages of the plan.
So if I may, for an example, Dennis, Commissioner Kamak, excuse me, we have identified in the Northern Range in the core city another cut, as it may be, particularly like Northern Range commercial or commercial reinvestment and regional commercial. And those areas have been identified based on that feedback that they've received from a multitude of the different stakeholders that participated through the process. So you have a general categorization at a much more sub-level detail that then dives into, for an example, on page 125 of the document, you talk about increasing access to employment, goods, and services. I think that's in direct reference and relationship to what you were saying about primary employment in the Northern Range. It then goes on to speak about how to expand those commercial and primary employment opportunities with varying degree of recommendations that can be captured, not specifically just within those highlighted pieces of properties and or interstate corridors and intersections, but also at a much higher level within the character areas. So they are all stacking together up and down to make sure that, once again, they are connected and that they are stitched together for the success of the community and of the city going forward, particularly in around that topic.
Yeah. And some of these comments are critical, certainly based on the last 10 years. I think we've made tremendous improvements over the last 2 years or so with Jason and Jim and the people in addressing some of these things and making good progress. So it's not all, bad and conflictive. One other question for Josh. Where do you stand on the roads and public, the roads plan that you're working on?
I think Jim mentioned that we're just at the initiation stage here, just getting started on it.
Have you had any interaction with the Planning Commission on that?
Not yet.
Why?
Literally, you're
We
just
haven't
starting,
started it yet.
It literally are just starting. We had to get to this point and then move into that.
Our job, and I'm trying to protect the Planning Commission here. I wish more of us were here, quite frankly. It's our job to do these things. The Planning Commission is responsible for the master plan and the comprehensive plan, not just a person that may have some input on a committee and so on and so forth. It says that right in our municipal code, section 10-3. And it says to review and get the council to approve the comprehensive plan and the physical development of the city. And then down in number 8, it says to be responsible for a major street plan of the city. And all of these things, even though economic development isn't necessarily in the municipal code, that certainly is a key part of putting all of this together. The reason I'm back on the Planning Commission is, and I told the interviewing committee, I want to see more conductive interaction with all of the different parts so that we can make this not only have a good plan for the city, but everybody's pulling in the same direction and they understand what other parts are doing and we get the right things done, as opposed to it has been, the Planning Commission in the past has been a rubber stamp for whatever the planning department wants to get through. And most of it has been the good stuff, but we should be much more than just saying yes or no to, does this follow the comprehensive plan?
I think both Jennifer, who's our planning manager now, and I would agree that we want the Planning Commission and would love for the Planning Commission to be actively engaged in these things as we move forward. My intent is that when we get started with each of these plans, that we come and we have regular meetings with the Planning Commission.
We will get to be best friends.
Yeah, I think City Council would welcome your active involvement, as would we. So we're going to make sure we structure that moving forward.
Is this, similar to what we talked about, Jason? I don't want to misrepresent my viewpoint.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, there is both functional but also foundational participation that we do need from the Planning Commission as it relates to the continued structured growth and planning for the city. That's absolute. I think what hasn't been said but needs to be said is that obviously you start with what is the foundation or the roots for all of the other branches and tree trunks to grow from, and that's your comp plan. You have to have a basic understanding of what your land use and your transportation systems and your parks and your other various, I'll call it, interested topics and principles, that being economic development, environmental, they're all intrinsically linked, but they all start and they build and they grow from the comp plan. And I think what you're hearing from the team is that we are on the cusp, or we are beginning to dig into an ED strategic plan. We are beginning to dig into a PRG master plan. We are beginning to dig into a transportation master plan, because now we have a framework, now we have rails that we can work off of with the other particular interested bodies. Planning Commission is not just the only one. Our Parks Advisory Committee is one. Our Public Safety Board is another. Our Housing Authority is another. All of them will have a specific and particular role as we continue to go forward on these matters, because, like I said, they're intrinsically linked.
If our job is to make recommendations to the city council, we have to have good, complete, and well-thought-out guidelines to make those recommendations. And so if there's things that aren't in this comprehensive plan that's been brought up, we need to make sure that we either put it in or have a vehicle to put it in, from this point forward, so that we can do the right job of planning this city for the future. And, some of the things like review of the comprehensive plan, we put that in the one 13 years ago, which I was a part of, and we were supposed to have a 5-year review. Planning department didn't do it. I specifically asked about that at the 5-year thing. I asked at the 8-year timetable if we were supposed to start looking at doing this process. Nothing happened. And that's water under the bridge. Different people, different organization, different council members. I would like to see some specific dates for some of the key things like review of the plan put into this document, not just 3 years or we should do it.
I think we can find, whether it's in this document or maybe an adopting resolution, we can do that. I will tell you, in the last 30 years of the plans I've worked on, I've had annual reviews of plans, just like when we adopted new land development code, annual reviews of those to make sure that we didn't miss something, that there's, there may be emergencies that come up, but, a plan is not a static document.
Right.
Comp plan can be changed and amended as conditions change. You don't want to do too much of that, but I think that's something that we're committed to being diligent, working, putting in place to have happen. I know we're getting low on time and we're at your convenience, but I would just say that between now and adoption, for Planning Commission and for City Council, we're available, Jennifer and I are available to sit down, go over parts to help you understand, have one-on-one, two-on-one conversations so we can get this done and make sure you're in a comfortable place. And it is a draft, and we can make changes as we go forward until we actually get to the night that you adopt it. You can make changes then, but then we can make changes as we go forward. So we want to do that and make sure you're comfortable. That's why we've offered, and we continue to offer to sit down with all of you if you'd like.
One class thing, then I'll sit down and shut up, okay? The input from the community hasn't been as good, in my opinion, as what we had hoped. And part of that probably is on us, part of it is probably on the community, but certainly part of it, I think, is on our advisors as well. As an example, the CAC meetings, many, if not most of them, and there were few, I don't know, 5, 6, something like that over a 3-year period, were not well attended. I am very disappointed in other commissioners, planning commissioners, not being here tonight. And if we're going to make this city going, we need to find people with the passion to do the things and then get it done. That's how you run a business.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Kim.
Well, I guess all my questions were asked, so what's the point of me asking? No, seriously. Can you, first and foremost, thank you for the presentation overall and also the understanding as far as how the CP is supposed to work. And Jennifer, thank you as well. for this as well. My questions I have is, I guess my first question is when we talk about retail within the CP comprehensive plan, what is defined as retail? How, I guess, back up, how is retail defined in the comprehensive plan?
Yeah, I don't have the page up here, but there are land use definitions. So if you go back to that, that table, all the ones that are at a diagonal there.
Right, but I'm trying to figure out, is there more of a verbiage within the comprehensive plan and somewhere in the 257 pages of this wonderful document, is it in there that says exactly what retail is defined as?
There is, yes. So
Okay, and-
right, there's a page, I don't have the page in front of me.
Page 80.
Page 80?
Yes.
80, give me one second.
Page 80 is what's called land use definitions, and you will find how they define commercial, which is retail, entertainment services, hospitality, travel services, primary employment areas, office, technology, research,
Hang
and
on,
so
slow
forth.
down. Give me one sec. Let me get there. Jeez. All right. Okay, so commercial land uses are intended for business and non-residential business activities, including day-to-day retail, entertainment, dining, service businesses, and larger regional commercial development. Okay. So with that definition in mind, I'm curious to know as far as what's identified on this slide, which I'm glad you have up, when you talk about primary land use cases and secondary. So if I was one to come in and was looking at primary only, I mean, is it pretty much, I don't know how to explain this or how to ask this question, but if you talk about primary land uses for that specific area, I mean, is that something that one person could, a developer could come in and say, well, it's a primary land use according to this guiding document, so we can go pursue that? Does that make sense? Versus a secondary use, case in point, if I look at, let's say number 1, 270 Industrial District, right? Primary employment areas is marked as a primary land use. If I say, all right, well, I'm gonna come in with that in mind, and that's all I'm gonna focus in on, the secondary is is that, can that be negated?
Well, I would say it's up to this body to evaluate the proposal. It certainly would, I would think it would be possible for a developer to come in with a development that's just employment, but you still have to evaluate it against the policy and direction in this document. And if you want to see something else or something that's appropriate alongside those areas, you have this as a tool to evaluate what they're proposing.
But it's not mandatory to go after, correct? I mean, this is not a mandatory.
Right, this is not, this is a policy document.
Okay, so it's essentially a developer could come in, say, hey, within the 270 Industrial District, I've got a primary employment area area I can use. That's all I'm gonna focus in on. They could technically come in with that, right? They can come in with that without identifying any commercial or retail or office spaces, correct?
They could, yes, they could.
Go ahead, Jennifer.
If I may, I'm sorry, Mr. Kim, I'd love to answer your questions. I would just give a little bit of an example to answer the question. So, right, because the future land use, the character areas is guiding, they're still gonna have to come in for zoning, right? If they have to change the zoning. So the idea here is, right, the 270 industrial area, we know there's a lot of I-2 and I-3 property down there, right? So that may even already be in place. Perhaps there's a small little lot that is I-2 or I-3, but it maybe makes sense for a lunch place, right, to serve all the employment in that area. This would allow the flexibility for council to decide to zone that commercially if it made sense, if it worked in that particular corridor, if that specific proposal made sense, it would give you all that flexibility. So really to complete the neighborhood, right, instead of everything down there having to be I-3, So there could be instances where, right, a lunch restaurant is kind of the first thing that comes to my mind, right? That could fit into that commercial designation. You're not going to want to see that throughout the whole thing. That's why it's designated as secondary. But there could be an instance where that makes a lot of sense. And so this approach to the comprehensive plan still gives council all the power through the zoning. It just eliminates having to amend the comprehensive plan for a single parcel for a single use that maybe made sense
But
in
we
one
can't
particular
go back
area.
and tell the developer, hey, no, we want to see retail in that area, right?
Of course, I think this document as a whole gives you all a lot of discretion and a lot of tools to use to make decisions on specific bases, right? In terms of, does this fit into the character area as a whole? Is this a positive addition to this neighborhood or to this commercial corridor versus it just being, is it the right color, yes or no?
Okay. So my next question then, I guess, regarding what retail is defined as and looking at the primary versus secondary that Andy Jermaine answered. I look at commercial, right? I look at all of that being identified as secondary for all of those areas with the exception of the stadium district. Why is that?
Yeah, again, commercial appropriate in most of the areas of the city, I think is the takeaway from this column here. There's also office, employment areas, hospitality and travel services. There's different types of commercial that get more specific in this table, but if there's one that you think needs to be reevaluated as a primary, we could certainly do that.
And I think it's worth mentioning, Josh, on page 122, the Economic Development Framework, you'll find that there has been this, I don't want to call it academic exercise, but an exercise of identifying certain properties both in our core city and our northern range that are at key locations along certain corridors or at key intersections with an identifier. Once again, right, how everything kind of stitches together. You have your character area, which calls out secondary and primary uses. But you then find in this economic and commerce framework more specificity to certain locations based on that type of development that is desired in that area of the city. So when you then couple that with the actual zoning powers, which is the actual enforcement of the policy advisement that you receive from the comp plan, you have that criteria, that 9 criteria or whatever we end up with as far as criteria with our new land development code that will be able to stitch this all together to being able to make that finding, to being able to make that argument, to be able to have that discussion, open discussion with a developer about some of those desired traits within a proposal that comes before you.
Okay, I guess what I'm afraid of, right, and it's just my own, I hear the comprehensive plan from other members on staff that say this is a mandatory use document, others have said this is a guiding document, and then at the end of the day, we're not sure as far as what document this is actually, and I totally get it. I just want to make sure that what's happening here is like, okay, if this is, let's say, 10 years, 20 years from now, that we're not here and it's new people, all in all, they're not going to look at this and say, well, nope, it says secondary use for all retail, so we necessarily don't have to use that. Does that make sense? Like that, I just want to make sure that doesn't, like, this is long after we're gone.
I think, council member, the key is that this is a guiding document. We're working on the LDC right now, which is the mandatory document until you change it. And this gives you the flexibility. All these uses that you see there are allowed within a character area, but it's you that determine which pieces of property are appropriate for which use. The fact that a character area shows certain uses doesn't mean that they're all appropriate on every piece of property. And when we start putting the zoning in place, that's where we look to make sure, if it's a commercial use, that there's good access, that the utilities are there, all the things that you would look for a commercial use for. Multifamily, is it in an area that should be commercial? No, you don't want to do it. There's certain areas that the key intersections and key corridors that we want to keep open for commercial development. I think that's one of the things that we've all recognized has been lacking in some of our processes and approvals in the past, is we tend to have let some good areas that could be commercial 20 years from now get filled up with residential. We want to be able to have policies in place to prohibit that and, or allow you to keep that from happening, but having the guidance. And again, without the danger you run into with a old traditional land use plan is, well, that piece of property is colored red or yellow. You got to let us do what that says. And that's not what this does. This allows a case-by-case evaluation of any particular change to determine if it's most appropriate. Again, we'll do a lot of that when we go through the LDC and set it in place, but 2 years later, if somebody comes in and wants to change, then we've got a really good document to be able then to not just look at one map, one area, but we've got policies and all those things to look at. So, I've used this approach before. I love it. I think it's so much better it gives flexibility, but it also gives you the ability to make decisions that are based on the entire document and not just what a map happens to be colored.
If I may, council member, I really like Jennifer's example of the small lunch counter near in the I-270 district. I worked in another community, and we've seen a lot of communities, I think, at HL where they're like, why are we getting these monotonous homes that just all look the same? Or why aren't we getting the nice Walgreens like the neighborhood one town over? And you ask, can we ask the developer to amend their proposal? You absolutely can. The communities that get the nice development and get the non-monotonous homes and the brick facade Walgreens instead of the cookie cutter one, those are the communities that have good planning documents that are specific to their community and that demand excellence from developers. And Commerce City can do that too.
Copy that. Thank you so much for that. Yes?
I apologize, Councilman Kim. I just wanted to point out, I think you all are right. I think there's a couple of diamonds missing from this table, in particular with the hospitality. So I've made note of that. So we will triple check that and clarify that as we make the revisions for the next iteration of this.
Copy that. And lastly, I got a question and a couple of administrative feedback. Regarding the feedback that was received from the community, is there a way that we'd be able to obtain a copy to see what residents have said?
Oh, of course. I have a whole huge stack of boards over at the planning area, right, from all sorts of dot exercises, all sorts of things, surveys, key choices. We can work to try to summarize some of that for you if there's something in particular. But yes, we have all of that. It's just putting it into a nice, neat package is a little bit of a challenge for you. We've worked extensively with the consultants to convey, what was presented to us through those various processes.
Okay.
I'll just chime in on that as well, if I may. Each of our scoped, more formal meetings that we did, the visioning workshops, the business workshop, those were summarized as part of this process. And those documents, I haven't looked at the website, at that section of the website recently, but those should all still be available, all the outreach summaries for all the outreach that we formally conducted. The more formal, where there was an interactive exercise and discussion with the public. And we're also happy to export the survey results and give
I
them
also
to you.
saw 2 hours ago was posted on the C3 website, or C3 social media page too, as far as asking for feedback too, again. So thank you for putting that out there. The last thing I had was more administrative than anything. So when I look at the cover, I see the Reunion logo on there, right? And also on chapter 1, I also see the Reunion logo again. And I think that might be something we want to look at replacing that, because I'm being honest with you, I think we hear about some residents who hear about the North and the South, they think, well, Reunion's its own place versus it being actually Commerce City. So why don't we look at something like taking pictures of Derby or put some Paradise Island or whatever the case is, put out there, represent what truly represents Commerce City as a whole. The other thing too, I got there on chapter 2, picture of the horse. The painted horse. I don't, while I think that could be considered offensive to some groups, as far as when you're painting a horse, the American flag on a horse, I would recommend that go away as well and replace that with something different. And goes back to what Councilwoman Noble said about Suncor, right? Having that as your image versus something that's really defines what Commerce City should be. But that's all I've got. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those are easy fixes, and we'll take a look at all the photos and make sure that they're appropriate.
Councilmember Noble?
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Councilmember Kim. And I did want to reiterate that because in looking at the comprehensive plan, United Parcel Service has 3,163 employees, and Suncor has 441. FedEx has 783. So there are several employers who have far larger employment basis than Suncor does. And I just wanted to bring this full circle, at least for me and for residents, because I was quite proud of what the City Council developed as the community vision statement. And I believe that we reflected what we see for our community and what our residents and constituents see for our community as well. Commerce City is a thriving community, economically strong, environmentally sustainable, and socially equitable. Commerce City is a healthy and safe city where fresh air, clean water, public health, and the preservation of natural open space are paramount. Commerce City is a financially sound city where businesses flourish through collaboration and innovation. Commerce City is a diverse community that celebrates its unique history, identity, and culture, where families and individuals of all ages can live, work, and play. That's what I saw as the comprehensive plan to make that vision come alive of what the community sees for itself. I don't know, since we're being asked to vote on this on August 21st, I don't know if I would be able to do that on August 21st at this point. So hopefully I will be having meetings with some staff to find out how we can. Thank you.
Mr. Kamek?
Don't throw a dart at me, but I'm an old commercial developer. Heavy on the old. Tell me your definition of flex space.
I would have to look back at I wouldn't want to misquote it, but on page 80, I think the manager said that.
Oh, regardless of what it is, I suggest that we all understand, the council, planning commission, you folks, and the staff, that flex space from a developer's standpoint is very flexible. And quite frankly, it can bring heavy office use in it. It can bring light industrial. It can bring assembly. It can bring phone operations in it. Flex space should probably be in 80% of those areas up there because it is a very flexible way to bring jobs into a community. When you only put flex in a couple places, you're thinking of it in that old-fashioned traditional industrial, light industrial only place, and that isn't flex space. Go down and take a look at Aurora and Denver right now. I mean, they're building millions of square feet of flex space with all kinds of different employments in it.
I think what you're referring to as flex space is spot on. And we'll take a look, like Jennifer said, we can take a look at the matrix, but the definition we have in here on page 80 reflects almost exactly what you just said. And I don't have my glasses on, but flex spaces can be used for a variety of purposes, including office space, retail space, or occasionally residential live workspace. Flex spaces are often used in developments which combine a mix of different typical types of uses into one area. When we do comprehensive planning, lots of times there's an area where could be office, could be multifamily, it could be light industrial commercial service. And sometimes it's not what should be in an area, but just saying, hey, these four things shouldn't go there, but there's a host of other things that could go there quite well. And so flex space is sort of that. You're identifying the range of things that could go there and eliminating things that absolutely shouldn't, like heavy industrial or single-family residential. But sometimes there's a property like, we don't know what the market's going to be like in 12 years for that area. or what the newest, best type of development might be that would be perfect for that. We don't know that yet. So to prescribe it specifically might be short-sighted. So for some of those areas, that flex notion is very good, as long as you go back to those characteristics of the character area, saying, you know what we're trying to achieve here, there's several different ways of achieving it. And that flex, just like you defined it and is in here, does that. So we can take a look at the column in this to see if it should be in more categories.
Any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you again for your presentation, the update.
Thank you.
Next up is going to be a capital investment program update and draft 2024 to 2028 CIP. I'll invite Jason Rogers, City Manager, to introduce the presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Staff has previously prepared a 5-year capital investment and preservation plan, CIPP, as an inclusion/component with our annual budget that's adopted. Based on conversations from the planning retreat in February with our council and a follow-up in March, staff has spent the past few months modernizing the functional operation of the program and rebranded it as the Capital Investment Program. The purpose and the goal is to promote a holistic view of project needs in a format that emphasizes prioritization and returning the focus back on execution of the basics to serve our community. With that, I'll turn it over to Trenton Robinson within our Center for Innovation to kind of speak through the steps that we've taken and then jump into the larger project at large.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. Honorable Mayor, members of council, again, my name is Trenton. I'm with the Center for Innovation. More importantly, I'm actually here to represent our capital projects team. This was a group of employees we brought together across the organization to help update the capital investment program and develop with our finance team the 2024 to 2028 CIP. So for tonight, what we'll talk about is we'll talk about what the new CIP means. We'll talk about the different types of projects defined by this new CIP. And then we'll also talk about the draft 5-year CIP as well before discussing next steps. Like I said, we formed a team. This is something that we in the innovation business like to call a change coalition. Essentially, it's a representative group of stakeholders across the organization who can speak to and provide different aspects of their subject matter expertise to a specific project or program. And so for this one, as you can see, we have representation from both the implementation and execution side in Public Works and PRG. We also have our finance team who have worked diligently at preparing this new program. And we've also got some representation from the City Manager's Office and the Center for Innovation as well. The coalition has been meeting every Friday or every other Friday for the past, I want to say 18 years, 8 months or something along those effects. The purpose of this was to ensure that everyone understands the CIP, everyone's on the same page about what the program is and how projects will be categorized, and that we can work to achieve a nice balance of projects between new construction and renovations and improvements. With that being said, I would like to hand it off to Teresa Wilson, our interim finance director, I believe, and to take the rest of the presentation.
She is no longer interim. She is now our permanent finance director.
I'd like to welcome Teresa Wilson, our real finance director.
Thank you very much. I hope to serve the city well and do a good job in this role, and I appreciate the opportunity. I also appreciate the opportunity to be before you tonight. Capital projects are funded and managed separately from day-to-day operating needs of the city. Costs of capital projects can vary from amounts under $100,000 to amounts in the tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars. A major goal within the CIP is to provide a good balance between capital maintenance and capital improvement projects. It's important to take good care of what we already have and to ensure we can continue to afford new projects added as our community grows. The old name CIPP, with improvement and preservation in the name, heavily emphasized maintenance and preservation needs. The CIP team rebranded this to CIP, which stands for Capital Investment Program. This new nomenclature is more holistic and encompasses all forms of capital investment, not just maintenance. As part of this effort, the CIP team also streamlined the capital project framework. We believe this new framework is easier to understand and will be easier to maintain. More detail regarding the streamlined framework is found on the next slide. Beginning tonight, you will hear us talk about 1A, 1B, and 2 categories of projects. The 1A preventative maintenance and 1B periodic maintenance categories both fall under the broad header of capital maintenance projects, with required frequency of maintenance being the key delineating factor between the two. Preventative maintenance is required annually, while periodic maintenance is required less than annually. Depending on the need, that might be every other year, every third year, or some less frequent period of time. Examples of 1A projects include bridge maintenance, concrete flat work, pavement management, and parks repair and replacement. 1A projects are considered Tier 1 projects, meaning that they are required to maintain baseline levels of service. We consider these the most important projects to fund for a variety of reasons, which are outlined on the next slide. An example of a 1B project is city parking lot reconstruction. This is something that's important to do, but not necessarily required every year. The 2 capital improvement category of projects is comprised of projects relating to new infrastructure and significant additions or alterations to existing assets. Examples of capital improvement projects include road improvement projects, intersection improvements, traffic signal program, and drainage improvements. This streamlined CIP framework provides a clear way to differentiate projects and improves resource allocation. This framework also simplifies project categories compared to the old framework by removing the confusion that we've had regarding operational and traditional projects. We place a heavy emphasis on the 1A projects to do a number of things, including avoiding project delays resulting in deferred maintenance, which can in turn increase costs to restore assets to acceptable standards, to use limited funding as efficiently as possible by directing resources to the greatest needs, which can be impacted by safety, high visibility, and level of use, to establish a financial baseline so we know what it costs to maintain existing assets, which helps inform the affordability of new capital projects, while placing a higher priority on maintaining existing before adding new. By decreasing unplanned downtime, by planning well for maintenance before items reach their breaking point, with the desire to be community and customer focused by minimizing closures and delays. Given the importance of these projects, we have labeled the 1A preventative maintenance projects as Tier 1 projects. Next, we would like to review the project prioritization and scoring effort with you. After categorizing projects as either 1A, 1B, or 2, then placing the highest emphasis on those Tier 1 projects to promote annual capital maintenance needs, we scored all remaining Tier 2 projects, which are comprised of the 2B periodic maintenance projects and the 2 capital improvement projects. All Tier 2 projects were scored according to the criteria listed at the bottom of this slide, as these factors are related to both project categories. For the 1B periodic maintenance projects, we also considered the cost of deferral during the scoring process. And for the 2 capital improvement projects, we also considered the portion of community served, quality of life and equity, and operations impact. The outcome of the Tier 2 project scoring effort is detailed on page 17 of the draft 5-year CIP document included in your packet. This slide lists funding sources dedicated to capital projects. With the exception of general fund transfers, each of these funding sources can only be used for applicable types of projects. For example, conservation trust funding has to be used for parks and open space projects, and road and bridge funding has to be used for transportation projects. Funding projects behind the scenes involves a complicated jigsaw puzzle that, no matter how it is put together, always seems to result in the same outcome of not having enough resources to completely fund every need on the table. We cannot always rely on general fund transfers to fund large projects, as we need to continue maintaining healthy fund balances and reserves, and the gap between operating revenues and expenditures has been narrowing in recent years. Dedicated capital funding resources are sufficient enough to meet the needs of 1A preventative maintenance projects, but not a lot more. So we need to be diligent about acquiring additional funding for capital projects through partnerships and grants. And we should be open to identifying and considering new funding sources as well. The draft 5-year CIP included in your packet details staff recommendations regarding the complicated jigsaw puzzle that I mentioned. The draft CIP includes the 5-year CIP summary, individual project pages showing additional details for each project on the 5-year CIP, and a Horizon projects list, which shows additional project needs that currently do not fit fully funded within existing capabilities. The draft 5-year CIP summary on this slide can be found on page 18 of the draft 5-year CIP document included in your packet. If you have the PDF document open, you can enlarge that so you can see it a lot better. But within this plan, we detail what previous funding exists for certain projects that had previous funding, what grant funding has been awarded, and then the 24 to 2028 funding recommendations across the 5-year planning horizon and the project total. That last category column shows the 1A and the 1B in a color-coded fashion with a color-coded summary at the bottom that shows you the total of each category plus the grand total. This slide shows the draft 5-year CIP Horizon projects list, which contains summary information regarding projects that we could not show as fully funded in the draft 5-year CIP. These 3 capital improvement projects are only partially funded. However, staff does recommend transferring $10 million from the Chambers Road Improvements Project to the 96th Avenue Improvement Project in order to have one of these projects fully funded rather than both only partially funded. This would leave about $3.3 million in the Chambers Road Improvements Project to complete design work, while additional funding is sought to complete this project. And this is something we can definitely further discuss and answer questions about. We also wanted to mention some important project planning correlations. Project costs have increased as a result of construction cost increases, labor shortages, and inflation. As a result, costs for multiple projects have been updated within this draft 5-year CIP. It is also important to note that there are plans and studies currently underway that will certainly impact project needs and costs moving forward. So this 5-year CIP will be updated every year and will be a dynamic and living document that's not completely fixed in stone. Although we have accomplished a lot in the past few months, we still have more to do. We want to make sure that we have some good dialogue with City Council and get some feedback from you on our initial recommendations. We'll need to incorporate the first year of the 5-year CIP into the 24 proposed budget. We want to continue working with project managers to determine O&M impacts to capital projects to make sure we can continue to afford ourselves. We want to develop a meaningful and routine project reporting process and develop an interactive project dashboard utilizing GIS and Power BI technologies. We need to continue working with project managers to refine the project management life cycle so we can define all the phases and steps involved in delivering a project. And we want to continue to seek grant opportunities and work with partners to deliver projects. And with that, I'd like to use the remainder of our time for questions and answers. And I'm accompanied by a great deal of subject matter experts in the audience to help.
Mr. Rogers?
I would be remiss if I didn't give Mr. Poe an opportunity to speak about what I think is a very important slide, number 14. That would be the discussion around 96th Avenue and Chambers Road. You all probably have a significant number of questions as to the cost estimates, why certain things are remaining unfunded, and I think it's best that we actually tackle that head on.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Yeah, we're in the process of designing 96th Avenue currently. We're about the 30% design stage. We had a fantastic open house here recently to get public input. And as part of that 30% design, we typically do a independent cost estimate by the consultant. And it came in at $19 million. So one of the first questions that I asked is, okay, we've got $9 million budgeted. How did we get here? And so the current cost estimate is based on the current construction prices that we're experiencing in the market. We are seeing the escalation taper off or basically level out. So that's a good thing when it comes to capital projects. But I actually even visited with the city engineer today, my predecessor, city engineer, to see how that number was achieved. And from his recollection, obviously I wasn't here, but was that there was a short time frame to put together the cost estimate as they were working on the fly. And they did a cost per mile that was used in the impact fee calculations to get that number. And I believe there wasn't even a number for the complete section. There was just Buckley to Tower. And then at the discussion stage with the city council, they added the section from Chambers to Buckley. So then they increased that by basically that factor based on just the length of that roadway. So there wasn't a lot of detailed analysis for the cost estimate, dealing with the time that the staff had at that stage. And so at this point, the estimate that we feel like is in the range that it needs to be for budgeting purposes. It does include escalation as well as inflation and contingency.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I just had one concern. In the presentation, it doesn't mention at all at one time that there was a capital improvement program citizen advisory committee, and it just mentions that it's only staff recommendations. So where is the resident community involvement? And then I'm curious, why and when it was stopped, because I think it was really important. I was co-chair when they had this committee, and we gave presentations back to the mayor and council at that time, and I think it's really important to see some resident involvement.
Great questions, ma'am. KIPCAC actually has been disbanded since 2020. At the time, my predecessor had made note a couple CIPP program discussions ago that the determination was made that there was very limited to no participation from members of KIPCAC in regards to the program. And that decision was made, in my understanding, once again, before my time, that with KIPCAC, that it was no longer serving the intended outcome or desired outcome. And since that, we have been operating from a technical and operational standpoint, from staff's review of needs, based on a number of different factors that you heard tonight, but also there are other things that play into that in order to make sure that we're meeting certain obligations.
So then it's a possibility that was 2020, so it can possibly be brought back. And then also part of the requirement, like when I was on the KIPCAP advisory committees, there were a certain amount of residents that had to live in the south to be on that committee and a certain amount in the north. So can that be explored in bringing that back? Because like I said, this is only staff recommendation. There's no resident recommendations.
I would say for the 2024 recommendations, I would say highly unlikely, man, just because of the timing in which we stand with initiating the budget here. You'll find starting next week, we're going to be diving into the budget discussions and then opening up the planning retreat for said discussions that then lead to adoption in November. the work that you find before you here has been for the betterment of possibly 3 to 6 months in getting to these recommendations based off of conversations that have been held internally, but also with you all as a body. I understand the interest, and I do believe it's something that's worth investigating and making recommendations on how council may want to formalize that committee as a board and commission. But as it currently stands, I would say we would be hard pressed just with where and how things are shaking out from a timeline perspective. I would say this: we've typically have brought this forward to you all in the middle of August, beginning of September. We wanted to daylight this sooner because of the conversations we've had in the past where we've had to go back and try to have some internal conversations and make certain changes. And we didn't want to wait to the last minute, quite frankly, to get this in front of you all, to get feedback so that we could then internally make the necessary changes or look at certain things that keep us on track.
Okay, well, I don't quite understand how it's a budget issue, but I would like more information to see, you know, even though there's a list, I would like more information how to bring that advisory committee back, because like I said, when I served as co-chair, I felt like I was really involved in what's going on in the city, so I wouldn't feel comfortable moving on with this till something was included to state what's the possibility and when of adding that citizen advisory committee back to give the residents to have an opportunity to voice how they feel as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Noble?
Thank you very much for the report. I have to say, I like the I-76 on-ramp. We did discuss that briefly, and if we could avoid the railroad tracks to get on I-76, that would be really helpful. I am interested in why pools weren't made a preventative, didn't fall under preventative because of the problems that we had this summer that delayed opening of the pools instead of just regular maintenance, that we always check in advance, like in the spring, to make sure the pools are operating so that when we do open, there's not a delay.
Yes, after what we experienced this year, we are going back and fine tuning our policies and procedures and setting calendar dates and going back and checking, making sure that things that we have to have preventative maintenance, that's typically budgeted in our operations, in our operational budget. So we're going back to make sure that partnering with the Parks group to make sure that all the pumps and everything else is working, and also starting it up sooner so that if we have any issues with those items, that we can have time to replace those before.
Okay, that would be good. I
But
see it
that's
as,
typically in your operations budget.
I see it as periodic maintenance on the sheets. That was why I was inquiring about why it wasn't preventative maintenance. Also on 96 and the 19 million, what does that mean for a tunnel under 96th or sound walls along 96th? Is the 19 million strictly for widening 96th?
That is correct. We have not had, we do have the consultant working on the feasibility study for a underground crossing, which right now it looks like the best place between Reunion or the landmark intersection would be the landmark intersection due to the physical constraints that we have with the topography. So the cost estimate does not include that until we get further along in that study, nor does it include any kind of sound walls. What we're planning to do, and what we explained at the workshop, if that came up, was working with the Reunion District. They have an area between the property lines and the right-of-way line to do some creative landscaping with some boulders and so forth to offer that any kind of protection for roadways, for any kind of vehicles coming off the roadway, if that unfortunately happens. I hope not.
So if any of that was done, it would be more than 19 million then?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Also, I don't, clarify something for me. When we had our retreat in the spring, Mr. Rogers, there were 200 and some items on that list. So it looks like this list has been whittled down to maybe 20 items or so. Is that
Yes,
correct?
ma'am.
All right, so the other, let's say it's 230, and it's whittled down to 20. What happens to the 210 that still needed to be done? The city council was asked to prioritize, and obviously we can't prioritize because it's a domino effect. We don't know whether the ragweed draw affects the, whatever. And ragweed draw, by the way, is not on this list. So what happens with the other 210 if this is for the next 5 years?
Absolutely. And that previous list of projects that was shared at the point in time were considered existing ongoing projects. This is very budget planning oriented for the next 5-year planning horizon. So one thing we're still working on is coming up with that routine reporting that needs to be developed to report on all existing projects moving forward. That list of 210 projects was indeed reduced. I don't have the exact new number of projects at the top of my head, but we did thoroughly review every single project on that list with the departments that own those projects and determined which projects were deemed closed, that we could close out, and which ones were still actively being worked on. So that is something that we can get back in front of you guys for sure to review in more detail. But it's kind of two different ends of the spectrum of what's already in place, in flight, ongoing, and what is being planned for the upcoming 5-year planning horizon, which is what you have before you tonight.
Okay,
Does
then
that help answer the question?
Yes, it does a bit. I do have 2 projects that I also want to inquire about. The remodeling of Buffalo Run Golf Course, remodeling the restaurant and expanding it, adding a second story, et cetera. What is the status of that? It's not on this list.
That project is currently out to bid. We are awaiting proposals back from contractors based on preliminary architecture and engineering for that rooftop patio, ballroom / conference space. And I believe that bid closes. Mr. Maxwell, please help me.
Well, I can, I'm on the committee for the selection of the construction manager, general contractor. We have a committee that is ranking the 11 proposals that we received, which is good because contractors seem to be a little bit more hungrier now. Hopefully that equates to lower bid prices. So we are in the process of choosing that consultant, and we are looking at doing interviews this week for the top 3.
Okay, and do we actually have money for that?
Yes, this money is, I believe, cash funded, and it was in the 23 budget. So that's why it's not reflective here. Same thing with the ragweed that you mentioned, the ragweed draw.
Yeah, right. That name just stands out in my mind.
Yeah, it's budgeted previously, so it's not on this 5-year list because this list takes 24 and.
Although I know where it is now. It's in Reunion Ridge.
Yes.
And then the final one is the widening of 120th. What is the status of the widening of 120th?
Yeah, that's also a project that was funded in previous years. We are working with the engineer to finalize those drawings to get out to bid last part of July, first part of August.
Okay.
There is a variance we need to achieve through South Adams County, which we're working with them. They're being great partners with that widening, and we're trying to get through that process so that we can get it out to bid.
And just to clarify on that one, we are not the lead. We are simply serving as a funding source, working with our partner being the Buffalo Ridge Metro District, who has contracted with the contractor. So we are working through and with them to get to that point.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
So I think a better follow question is, we have money that was set aside for Buffalo Run. Have the contract bids that have come in above or below what was budgeted? Given the fact that the estimate was done at the same time as the 96th Avenue debacle, were we off on that one as well, and we're going to have a funding shortage?
We did do a 90% funding cost estimate, and currently we have enough funds for that, based on that estimate. We have not bid it out yet, so once we get those numbers, we will be coming to you for award.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to clarify too, it was called the Capital Improvement Project Committee, but you mentioned in 2000, it was stopped in 2020, but I was curious, did the mayor and council members officially vote to stop that?
I'd have to go back and really do our due diligence, ma'am. I can't speak with some level of certainty, but I do know it was around the year 2020 in which it was disbanded.
Okay, because I would like more information, within the next week if I can, to find out if it was officially voted to stop by the mayor and the other council members.
Yes, ma'am. We can
Thank you.
look that information up.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? We, during all those planning retreats and everything, we did get a list of projects that were probably completed years ago that money is still sitting out. Has any work been done to clean up those projects in order to free that money up to fund some of these shortfalls?
Yes, sir. But I'll allow Teresa to dive into that more.
There were a handful of projects that we were able to receive confirmation that they were completed. And one thing on our list to put more firm procedure around is to have a more defined capital project closeout procedure so that when a project is closed, we know it sooner. We go through the checklist with the project manager, make sure everything's been done, the last invoice has been paid, any contingency needs have been met, and then we can properly close out a project within the financial system and transfer the remaining balance to the original source of funding that those projects came from. And that would allow those balances to be reallocated by city council through future planning sessions like this. We did close out a handful of projects in that manner, and we can certainly provide you a report of that within the very near future. We can put that list together of the projects, the remaining balances, and what happened with those balances. We can definitely put that together and get that in front of you all.
Thank you. Mr. Rogers?
If there's no further comments, there is one topic I do think we need to address and need to be very just open about it. Seeing that number for 96th Avenue come in $10 million more than what was initially estimated. Quite frankly, I would ask the question, or I did ask the question of myself, and I asked the question of our team, how do we present numbers, and how do we have not just our council, but how do we have the community trust the numbers that we put in front of you all to be able to take action on? And I will tell you, talking with the team very intensely around this matter, that we are changing the ways of how we have looked at cost estimating in the past going forward to make sure that we are being more accurate and being more specific in detail so that you all can make those hard decisions as it relates to supporting the community's needs with backbone infrastructure, both from a parks and a roadways perspective. And I would ask Mr. Poe to kind of highlight what we're going to be and how we're going to be looking at that. That's going to be more in line. And like I said, effective going forward.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Typically, what we'll be doing is looking at data from previous jobs that have been bid, recent jobs. We look at the CDOT data that they put out. We look at what the CPI is predicted to be based on the trends that are occurring in the industry. I don't like to be, when we're bidding, estimating these things, I don't like to be the low bidder. And so there's also, based on the timing of the project, for each year that it is planned, we will be adding escalation for inflation, as well as cost escalations and contingency. And so those factors will vary depending on when the project is planned to be delivered. Obviously, if it's planned to be 4 or 5 years out, those percentages will be higher than if it was for a project that's going to be planned for next year. So we're taking a more in-depth look at these cost estimates based on the data that we're seeing in the market.
Mr. Rogers?
Just a quick follow-up. Thank you to the city clerk's office. They actually sent me the council communication in which was brought forward on August 17th, 2020, in which KIPCAC, the Capital Improvement Program Committee, or Citizens Advisory Committee, was recommended to be dissolved and action was taken by council. So that was August 17, 2020. We will get that council communication out to the council.
And then, Mr. Rogers, do you mind if I follow up on that?
By all means, sir.
It looks like on October 19, 2020, there was a resolution, 2020-66, resolution abolishing the Capital Improvement Project Citizen Advisory Committee.
Councilmember Kim?
Thank you, Mayor. So, Mr. Poe, when you talk about moving forward as far as to show what our budget's going to look like and all, and as a fellow project manager, will we be seeing the EAC as well, estimated at completion?
I'm sorry, what was that question?
The EAC,
Right.
you know what the EAC is, right? So during a project that occurs, right, for project management, you mentioned you would look at the CPI, and I know CPI is only just one aspect of it versus the SPI.
Right.
But with EAC, EAC, while the project's ongoing, that typically is it stands for your estimate at completion.
Correct.
Is that some kind of, because it basically, in a nutshell, with EAC, it kind of goes like when the project's ongoing, you're able to obtain, what your forecast kind of looks like towards the end there.
Sure. We have a number that we do, it's basically our base budget that we do for the cost estimate. But as the project is designed, you get more information on that project. So we do intermittent estimates between that. So if we're making sure that we're tracking on the base budget that we had before.
My assumption is you'll be making sure you'll have management reserves as well, or a UB unbudgeted, just sitting on the side?
Yes. Yeah, so we.
For those
we-
contingencies?
Correct.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much, ma'am. Thanks, sir. Thanks, sir. Next up, be Adams Tower update. John Bourget, the management analyst, please come forward and introduce the presentation.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the City Council. I am here this evening to give you an update on the Adams Tower project. So tonight we'll provide an update on the project status. We'll also review the original purpose and vision for the space and discuss the potential for alternative uses for this space. As to where we are currently, last month I came before council asking for approval for a contract with MW Golden Constructors as to serve as the general contractor for this project, and we are under contract with them. We are working with our architect and the general contractor to develop a permitting set of plans. Now, right now, we have pressed pause on that pending tonight's discussion, and I'll get more into that in a little bit. We are also, at this time, underway with upgrades to the HVAC system that are needed for the floor, as well as beginning installation of some of the AV that we will need for the space, and we've started that earlier because we have a long lead time for order for some of the components. Now, initially, when we purchased this space, this was at council's direction, and it was council's direction at the time, shortly after purchasing it, that this space be used for nonprofits at a no or low-cost resource for the community. And at this time, we want to assess the current demand for office space in the nonprofit community to make sure that we are using this resource as best as we can. Essentially, we don't want this space to be sitting unused or underused. To that end, staff published a request for information to the nonprofit community in the area. This RFI was published on the city's website, and staff also conducted outreach sharing this directly with nonprofits in the community, as well as asking those nonprofits to share it with other nonprofits in the area. We received one response back from this RFI. This RFI, which is included in your packet, was essentially attempting to assess the need that these agency or these organizations have for this space, their intended use for it, how much of the space they would utilize, as well as other pertinent questions. Based on the low response that we received back, that seems to indicate that there's currently a low demand for this space in the nonprofit community. We have also been exploring potential staff use for the space to make sure that the space is best used. If there's low demand in the nonprofit community at this time for the space, this is certainly a resource that would be a great asset to staff. And I'll let Mr. Rogers talk a little bit more and fill in some of the details that I'll surely miss as I run through our plans for it, but essentially converting this into a development services center where we would have all of our development permitting operations in one place on this 5th floor unit. It would be embedded primary services within the community, and it's also a good location for that. It has good access for the public.
And I think one thing that's not, well, it is somewhat captured up there with the ability to be able to expand to the 6th floor, but something that we're seeing more and more, and I think it's very important, is being able to have a function really embedded into our community will allow for us to be connected to the community, to be a part of the community, particularly on a service that is probably one of the most frequented outside of our municipal court or PD functions here at the Civic Center. If you think about that and its attraction for a number of different users, there's no transit to this facility. That location is within bus and light rail transit that provides accessibility to a broader demographic that we currently can't serve here at the Civic Center. And in particular, once again, it's a one operational focus of being able to get things out into the community much sooner, much faster. I think what's more intriguing is the opportunity for our community well-being to be located in a building which is already quite populated with a number of different nonprofits that are located on floors 1 through 4. An example being Kids First, Early Child Partnership for Adams County, Front Range Addiction, Harm Reduction Team, United Economy, Family Counseling. And the reason why that is such an important aspect, as we continue to address the matter of homelessness or those at risk of homelessness, there is a lot of activity that comes from this building to our homeless navigator and the team congregated together. However, there's very limited walk-ins and or activity that we get at the Civic Center. There's reasons for that. I will call it out. PD and the influence and just the perception of it is a detractor for those users. In particular, there's no ability to have transit service or to be able to get from point A to point B. So being able to actually be in the same building to where people can be walked up, handed off, and actually have case management within that facility is an absolute opportunity, because right now we're not capturing seniors, we're not capturing adult families at this location. We get better traction actually at our Eagle Point Recreation Center, but even that is still a travel and a hike for some of those residents that we want to be able to serve. The other aspect is the SWAP program. As you all know, there is a centralized approach for SWAP currently at North Glen. They are talking about moving to a decentralized approach in which for which our 10 to 15 vouchers that we receive during SWAP that they help to process and case manage will ultimately come back to the city. We need a location and the ability to have the right support. We believe Almost Home can help provide that additional support from a staffing and for capacity, but it doesn't address where these individuals would actually be able to be located to have that level of service. Adams Tower presents that opportunity in being able to address that potential burgeoning need here, whether it's for a cold snap or extreme heat, right? We need to be able to be somewhere for that. And I would say lastly, community well-being has the ability to bring strategic nonprofits with it to that location. We currently work with Yahweh Clinic. That is our street medicine team where they do pop-up clinics. Right now, we do that at the food bank. Having an exact location allows for it to be more consistent and allows it to be more accessible to those who need it with being able to get to that location. So to us, we think it's a win-win opportunity. And if we were to go after the 6th floor, that would allow for that diversification of both just not city services, but city services and nonprofits. We would make a request in the future to leverage ARPA dollars to secure that floor, given that that's well within the Treasury's rules for the use of those dollars.
So just in that, as Mr. Rogers was talking about the 6th floor, the 6th floor is currently vacant. It's owned by the Urban Land Conservancy, from whom we purchased the 5th floor and who overall owns the building. The floor is for sale. ULC has informed me they are currently in negotiations, early stage negotiations with another organization about potentially leasing the floor from them, but they are still open to us as a potential buyer for the floor. And again, this is where we could potentially locate community well-being along with nonprofits. This would give us a pretty substantial footprint in the building, along with the numerous other services that already exist in this space. Moving to next steps, the two questions that we're asking tonight is, does council wish to use the Adams Tower at office space for development services for staff use? And also, does council wish to explore using the 6th floor as a resource center containing community well-being and using ARPA funds to purchase the floor? And the list price for that floor is $1.1 million. Obviously, we would negotiate with ULC as to what the final price would be, but that's what it's currently listed as. Thank you.
Councilmember Chacon?
Thank you. Honestly, this couldn't come more than a timely way right now. I actually got an email from Lucille Ecohawk from Native American Housing Committee, and she just emailed me to tell me that Denver Indian and Family Resource Center is about to lose its location by year's end. That's one of the last spaces that we even have that intersects for houseless relatives, for food share, for 48, no joke, 48 different tribes within Adams County alone. They desperately need a location by year's end. So I know of at least 2 nonprofits right there that they could directly work with you, and all of them intersect, including to health and family wellness as well. So if there's any way that I can link you to her, or at least a location, that's some way we can help her, because that's the last location in Denver that they had.
Yes, ma'am.
Councilmember Noble?
Did we tell the nonprofits, the 50 nonprofits that you reached out to, that the space was free?
Yes, ma'am. The RFI included the information as to the intended use, and that this is intended as a lower no-cost space.
It's changed a lot since I was an executive director of a nonprofit. That might be quite an attraction if I'd heard that. Is there a reason why you wouldn't put community well-being and other nonprofits on the 5th floor and not buy the 6th floor? You could use ARPA funds for the money that's already been expended, for the $1 million that was already expended for the 5th floor and any build-out.
I'm going to try to tackle it as I wrap my head around. So we have, quite frankly, a staffing resource constraint within this facility, right? So the primary, obviously, objective, we have 2 primary objectives. One, community well-being is currently right now, in all due respect, struggling with the lack of dedicated space to be able to serve the community. Yes, we could put community well-being in the 5th floor with nonprofit organizations, and that would meet a partial need of our staff resource constraints, but not all of it. Having the ability to have community development over there, which is one of our larger departments, and quite frankly, we are running out of space for the staff within that department. We are currently hoteling 2 to 3 people in one office and having to run shift schedules within those offices for them to be available in the office. So we are just simply running out of space. We've added 150 employees in the city, and we're trying to find a place where to put them. So we have a need in that standpoint. But that is just, in my mind, additional support for why having a community development service center embedded in our community makes a lot more sense when you think about it. Because like I said, That's one of the primary functions, and able to have accessibility at a higher level. The build out of the 5th floor has already been budgeted. To my understanding, so there's no financial impact with having to leverage ARPA dollars. Knowing with where our budget requests are coming in at for 2024, and just talking about CIPP, excuse me, I have to start thinking about the new word, capital investment program, and the impact that that may have on the general fund with transfer to help support what you saw just previously. ARPA makes the most sense for us to be able to leverage, particularly for that 6th floor, and being able to build that out specifically for the community well-being, as well as the potential strategic nonprofits that could come along with it, knowing that we need that support for that space and for that sector with community well-being.
I had suggested that previously for the Adams Tower building, and what I was told is that it was too close to the sheriff's station. We wouldn't be solving the problem of community well-being and the police department if we put community well-being across the street from the sheriff's department, if we're dealing with the unhoused community. Would that be correct?
I think that may have been an initial thought process. I can't speak to who raised that question or who raised that point, ma'am. I would say my argument in today's world is we have a safe parking lot within that building or within that property that's currently being utilized for those at risk or those who are homeless. So there's actual I'll call it increased activation with being able to help those residents that are actually on site, but not necessarily within the facility. And I would say we've actually started to see some of those nonprofits that are directly or indirectly working with that community within that building and seeing and hearing from those individuals. And Mr. Tolbert can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the issues that they have is that they can't get to us to be able then to complete the case management process. So I think the initial assumptions and or perspective around being too close to the sheriff's office is being debunked by those who are actually leveraging the various services within the building, but also living on the property in that safe parking.
All right, except you did mention it with regards to using this facility and the proximity to the police department, so that's why I thought I would raise that question again. So what you're really looking for is to be able to put the community development department, the whole department on the 5th floor, or a portion of the community development department on the 5th floor?
The entire department, ma'am.
Okay, and then on the 6th floor, community well-being wouldn't necessarily need the entire floor and might be able to accommodate Councilmember Chacon's nonprofit that she just raised, because generally they're fairly small.
Yes, them and others who may, like I say, want to strategically partner with our community well-being. Like I said, the Yahweh Clinic is one that's obviously expressed interest. And, they're the street medicine team that's from CU Denver Anschutz that currently comes out to the food bank. I think this would be a highly interested site for them.
Okay, and if you do another RFP or RF or whatever it was, could you also ask for references? Because I noticed on the one application there was none, and when I went to look them up on, to Google them, et cetera, there were really no reviews. It was, I think it's important that they have references, whether they're from CU Anschutz or from the group that Councilmember Chacon is talking about.
Certainly, ma'am.
Thank you.
Councilmember Kim.
Thank you, Mayor. So with regards to how much did you say that space they're selling it for was?
1.1, sir.
1.1. I guess my question would be is where would what you mentioned ARPA dollars would be used potentially to obtain that facility? Is this the same ARPA dollars where there was a survey put out? So, but that was not mentioned to the community yet, is that correct?
We have a question about a walk-in / resource center out to the general community as part of our survey. I was going to raise this during my review, my report out, but right now we stand at 1,381 responses to that survey. That survey closes August 18th.
Okay.
So we should have a better sense about where the community supports that and/or other potential activities in support of homelessness or food equity or microtransit as it may be, as outlined within that survey.
So my other question too is, if we were to go after this for the sixth floor, how would that building be, I guess, how would our floor be regulated as far as who would be in charge? Would that be CD, community development, or is that, I mean, who would manage that essentially?
So for the fifth floor, community development would operate that floor no differently than it operates the west wing of our building on the ground floor, with access to various conference rooms and or issuance of permits and meetings with residents and home builders and developers.
Well, at the end of the day, for me, I think this sounds like a great idea, especially when it comes to having nonprofits up there to help out homeless. I mean, we do have a problem within Commerce City, but of course it is nationwide all in all. And, you know, it's sad all in all. And obviously there are some people who want to obtain that help, others who don't. But I mean, to have the resources available within our city is definitely a plus. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. I think also this is an excellent idea, but I just had one question. We had someone previously come before the, excuse me, come before the mayor and council. I'm requesting to put a 90-unit building in that same area. So my concern is there going to be enough parking there?
It is my understanding, and Mr. Borgelli is shaking his head yes, so I'll let you tackle that.
There are approximately, and I might be wrong, but I believe there are 270 parking spots for the whole building. Some of those are deeded to each floor. I, off the top of my head, don't remember how many we have deeded to us for the fifth floor, but each floor is guaranteed a certain number of parking spots, and then the rest are general use.
Okay.
And I believe that residential development is at least doing 66. I do not have the development plan, but they were required to at least do a 1-to-1. And I also believe they were doing some additional guest parking, but they were doing at least one space per unit.
Okay, yeah, because that's my only concern, is making sure if that were to move on, that the residents living in that building and then the employees would have adequate space to park. But otherwise, I mean, I think it's an excellent idea if there's adequate parking.
370 spaces, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. And do we know, though, if by chance, just say that a 90-unit, wouldn't some of those parking spaces be taken away?
No, ma'am. They were actually, so that development's actually a 66-unit project. That project was going to be replacing those 66 units, I believe, within the interior of its structure. But we can confirm that.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Madera?
Yeah, I'm supportive of both these measures. You know, it's one of the only office buildings that we have in the city, and you know, we've been growing and bursting at the seams, so it seems like a logical solution for that problem. And you know, just it would be nice to see people back in this part of town. You know, we had, I mean, Councilmember Noble's husband, I think, worked there at one point, and it was a bustling part of town, and there was a lot of stuff going on. And you know, over the years, once the county moved out, you know, you felt the impact in that community. So, you know, it's not just good for us, but it's going to make an impact on the city and, you know, that part of town especially, bringing people in, bringing in those nonprofits and having that support system there for people who need it.
Councilmember Noble?
I know TANF used to be on the 6th floor. There remains, though, for your employees, the issue of the gravel pit and all the dust that's kicked up. There were days when no one was able to leave the building because of all of the dust. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not really the best facility in the world for your planners and so forth necessarily. There were some nonprofits inside who were concerned about the unhoused population having random access to the elevator. So I think it would be incumbent on us if we make use of that elevator for any kind of nonprofits or community well-being activities that might have the unhoused coming and going, that we provide the security for the building and at the elevators, because as you note, Kids First is on one floor. The Kids Dental project is also on that floor. So you want to keep that in mind. That'll be an interesting mix, if you will.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions or comments?
Mayor Huesman, Councilmember Douglas has her hand raised in Zoom.
Councilmember Douglas?
Thank you. I have the same concerns that Councilwoman Noble has. I am not in favor of purchasing the 6th floor. I don't even know if purchasing the 5th floor was a good move to begin with, but to think about going ahead with purchasing another floor when we don't even have this floor thought out is a big mistake, in my opinion. I'm not so sure about moving community development over there. Would that include code enforcement and all of the members of that department?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and would we have like an upper level member of the administration in that building as well to provide oversight? I know that I've heard a lot of complaints from our residents who need services from the housing authority that they are never there at the Del West property, and they can't get in touch with them. And I don't want the same kind of thing to occur moving an entire department over to another site that we have had slated to have nonprofits occupy. And knowing that there is need out there, as Council Member Chacon just talked about, I think we should still explore the possibility of finding those nonprofits who are in definite need of space. So those are my concerns, and yeah, I'm also really, really concerned about the existing pollution that's over there and exposing more people to that as well. Those, there are a lot of concerns that I have with this.
Thank you for that, ma'am. To answer your first question, yes, community development's executive and senior leadership would be located in that building. So administration of those various functions, like I said, there would be no change to what you find in this building that would be in that new building.
The other thing is that when I have been at our civic center, I find a lot of the offices are unoccupied. I mean, they probably have somebody assigned to that office, but I don't see people in them. Just another thing that I've noticed and is a concern. Just something to consider.
Thank you, ma'am.
Any other questions or comments? How long ago did we buy this building?
This building was purchased in March of 2021?
Yes, sir.
2.5 years ago.
Yes, sir.
Construction still hasn't started on it. We still don't have a firm plan on what's going on. Enough said. Let's go ahead and adjourn to the reports. Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. First up, I'd like to talk about the school traffic calming projects. We currently stand on schedule for the end of this week. We have completed 10 and a half of the 16 schools. This week we have slated DuPont, Monaco, Timig, Landmark, South Lawn, and Second Creek. Construction has been going smoothly and have not experienced any issues. Like I said, currently we are currently on task to have that completed. With our ARPA funds survey, that will remain open till August 18th. We have currently, like I said, received 1,381 surveys. For business and economic development, we had a ribbon cutting last week for DOCA. DOCA is a new operation that is particularly a headquarters for construction materials. Its facility is 52,000 square feet. And they had purchased that property for approximately $21 million. They will have initially 20 employees with a projected growth to 45 over the next 5 years. As it relates to business attraction, staff is currently developing a program that will help grow and support Commerce City entrepreneurs. This will be for startup merchants who are looking to open physical locations in Commerce City and kind of go through a boot camp, a 6-week program, and be able to teach business skills. So that is currently in the works, and we hope to be able to bring that forward to you all in the near future. As it relates to public safety, just as an update on our police substation, we will be closing on the property, knock on wood, this Wednesday, July 26th. That property has been vacated or is in the process of finally being vacated by the tenant and the property owner, at which time we will then be able to take keys. But excited to be able to close that purchase and ultimately then start moving into the next steps over the course of the next 3 to 6 months of a public engagement with our community in and around that facility and that space and how best to serve that community. From an urban renewal perspective, if you all have driven by the Mile High Greyhound site, you will start to see that we are moving up to the 3rd floor with the Woodspring Suites Hotel. That will be 122 rooms. And as how we are moving forward, that's expected to be completed and ready to start serving guests early 2024 based on its current construction schedule. So positive news there. And then last but not least, the Kurt Holland Memorial Golf Tournament sponsorships are still available. This will be the 3rd annual Kurt Holland Memorial Golf Tournament on Friday, August 25th at Buffalo Run Golf Course. If there are any, I would say, interested parties in helping to raise funds for post-secondary education scholarships for residents, employees, and their dependents, please feel free to reach out to c3gov.com/chgolf. And our staff would be more than willing, and QCF be more than willing to help get you set up for sponsorship of that very important event. And with that, that closes my report.
Thanks, sir. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Rogers? Councilmember Kim?
Mr. Rogers, in your report, you mentioned as far as the speed humps that are going in and around. Is there a possibility, I didn't see it on the website itself, to show where how many per school is going in and where exactly?
Yeah, so there's, on our website, there are 2 links. On that second link, so the first link, you will find an interactive map that will identify the schools with a overlay of a satellite map. The second link is what you'll find is a PDF. It is in that PDF, you will find the exact locations and number of speed tables / humps as well in and around each school that's been identified within our municipal boundaries, but also within unincorporated Adams that our residents also populate. So that is up and available on our website.
And out of curiosity, how much is Adams County involved in this with their unincorporated areas?
Adams County has been at the table with staff consistently. When we were having initial discussions back in April/May, in discussing how to best work within Adams County's right-of-way, we have already an existing IGA with them that speaks to maintenance responsibility and quite frankly, construction of certain street sections in which we have interpreted that we're able to move forward with being able to do this work. We do think there is at some point in time, we should probably clean that up just to make sure that there's clarity going forward into the future about responsibility for those speed tables or speed humps. But it is in those meetings and ultimately a follow-up email from them that supports us taking the lead and being able to get this done on the timeframe that was set by council, which was before the beginning of the school year, which is that second week of August.
So my last question, I think you just already answered it too, was regarding funds from Adams County. Has that been donated over to help out with this project as well? Is that what I heard or no?
Say that one more time, sir.
So with regards to Adams County actually providing funds over for this project, have they done so, or in order for us to take the lead on this, or have they not?
We haven't had discussions about financial commitment or participation in this. Quite frankly, did not want to necessarily get bogged down in those discussions, given that we were working with a short window to be able to execute this. I think the primary focus was being able to get their participation and support and being able to do the work. And they have graciously and willingly been supportive of us taking that lead. They've been on site with us as we've installed these speed hump speed tables within their right-of-way to make sure that we have their approval. So it's been a good partnership in that aspect.
Copy that. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Rogers? Thank you. Interim City Attorney Geiger.
Nothing super exciting to report. Thank you.
Any questions for Ms. Geiger? Any council members wishing to make a report, keep in mind that per council policy number 16, all reports are limited to 5 minutes. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mayor. I just would like to remind everyone that last Monday, I was notified that former council member Vi Vigil passed away. She passed away on July 13th, and she was the first Latino female council member and the first Latino female mayor pro tem. The family's planning a memorial for her in memory of her life on September 9th, and there's more details to come. And just wanted to remind everyone to please keep her family in prayers. She was a great woman. I remember her. She was on city council when my father was on city council. Like I said, she was a very sweet person, did a lot for the city. Also, on July 13th, I attended the park, forgot the name of the park, but it was up north, and the music in the park, and listened to the Brass Attack Band, and it was a really good event, enjoyed that. And then also on July 11th, with Councilmember Christy Douglas, I'd like to thank staff member Bill Aiken. He gave us a URA tour of all the Urban Renewal Authority properties, and then just want to remind everyone and encourage everyone to come out. My family's hosting a national night out. That is August 1st, and at my father's address at 6060 Pontiac from 5:30 to 7:30. You can come out and have a hot dog. This national night out is a big event. I've been doing it, my family and I, for about 8 years, and it enhances the relationship between neighbors, law enforcement, while bringing back a true sense of community. So come out, meet our great officers, the fire department, and the paramedics. So wanted to make sure you reach out and see where your national night out is, and you're welcome to come to my father's address as well. Thank you.
Councilmember Noble.
Thanks very much, Mayor. We had a Policy and Governance Committee meeting. I attended the 96 Widening Community meeting. That was very well attended. And last Friday, I had a meeting with Mark Bush, who is part of the development team for Buffalo Run and so forth. Thank you.
Councilmember Chacon?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to update. I went this past Friday and Saturday to the Labor Network for Sustainability Conference. And it was specifically a strategic conference that was to work with unions, work centers, and labor organizations to help the labor movement become a leading force for a just transition and climate-safe and equitable economy. One of the biggest things that we heard from all the spaces for more of a just transition was continuing education and continuing workforce development. It was actually a really, really good conference that I actually did the conflict resolution and equity frameworks because it did have rail yard workers, steel workers, and then union workers for climate justice, but it was one of the most encompassing ones I've been to across all the sectors to truly find innovative ways to not just address workforce development, but sustainability and renewability, and that does directly relate to Commerce City in so many ways. So I would love to forward all the information that I got from there to all the council members in the city and see if there's other ways that we could also try to fund through a lot of open grants that way.
Any other council members wish to make a report? Councilmember Kim?
Thank you, Mayor. I had the opportunity last Wednesday to attend the District Accountability Committee hosted, chaired by Ms. Brandy Valdez for Adams 14. Had a few Adams 14 board members there to include the superintendent, Dr. Carla Loria, that was there in attendance as well. Essentially, as I mentioned at last Monday's city council meeting, it was basically looking into more in-depth with policies, regulations that the Adams 14 has with regards to cyberbullying, bullying in general, things that Adams 14 could do as a whole. This kind of stems from the 27J discussions that we're able to get set up with Mr. William Pierce, the deputy superintendent up there. So it's same subject, same stuff. That's all I've got.
All right, that concludes our study session.
Mayor Huseman, Councilmember Douglas.
Councilmember Douglas?
Thank you. I just wanted to let everybody know that I will wait to give a report when I am there in person. So thank you.
All right, that concludes our study session. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break and use the restroom and facilities, get something to drink, and then we'll jump into our special meeting. All right, let's go ahead and call the special meeting to order. Ask the clerk to call the roll. Present.
Mayor Huseman.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Ellen Thomas.
Present.
Councilmember Madera.
Present.
Councilmember Chacon.
Present.
Councilmember Noble.
Present.
Councilmember Hurst. Councilmember Kim.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Douglas.
Here.
Mayor Huseman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. I need a motion and a second to excuse a member not present. Councilmember Madera.
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Second.
I have a motion, second to excuse a member not present. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, do a voice vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0, one excused absence. I'm going to move on to our public hearings. It's on Resolution 2023-086, First Amendment to the Mile High Greyhound Park Urban Renewal Plan. This time I will open the public hearing. And any council members have any questions for staff? Seeing none, do we have any virtual speakers?
No, sir.
Do we have any in-person speakers?
No, sir.
Do we have any written comments?
No written comments were received by the deadline.
All right, at this time, I'll close the public hearing. Looking for a motion second to adopt Resolution 2023-086. Councilmember Ford. Councilmember Madera.
Second.
I have a motion second to adopt Resolution 2023-06. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title, please?
Resolution 2023-086, a resolution of the City Council of the City of Commerce City, Colorado, making certain legislative findings and approving the First Amendment to the Mile High Greyhound Park Urban Renewal Plan.
All right, I have a motion second to adopt Resolution 2023-086. The title has been read. All those in favor? Any opposed?
Nay.
Motion carries. Sorry, was that a second nay? All right, motion's going to carry 6-2 to 1. Next up is going to be resolutions, and we're going to start with Resolution 2023-065, Second Amendment to Lotus Engineering Contract. Does anybody on council have any questions? Seeing none, looking for a motion second to adopt Resolution 2023-065. Councilmember Madera?
So moved.
Councilmember Ford? Have a motion second to adopt Resolution 2023-065. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title?
Resolution 2023-065, a resolution authorizing the Second Amendment to Professional Services Agreement with Lotus Engineering and Sustainability LLC to provide sustainability services.
I have a motion second to adopt Resolution 2023-065. The title has been read. All those in favor? Any opposed? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0 to 1. Next up is going to be ordinances on first reading. We have Ordinance 2357, approving ballot question for charter amendment on notices. Does anybody on council have any questions? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion second to introduce Ordinance 2537 by council as seated and approve on first reading. Councilmember Madera?
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Second.
I have a motion second to introduce Ordinance 2537 by council as seated and approve on first reading. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Noble?
Yes, I'd like to know we've been having someone abstain the last two votes. Who is that? Who is abstaining?
It's not an abstention. It is the fact that Councilmember Hurst is not here.
Okay, so it's 3, what are you saying? 3, 2, and 1?
So
Why do you even list him if he's not here? That's all. It was confusing to me.
it's listed as an excused absence.
Ah.
Any other questions regarding Ordinance 2537? All right, having a motion and second to introduce Ordinance 2537 by council as seated and approve on first reading. Will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2537, first reading of an ordinance submitting to the registered electors of the City of Commerce City at the regular municipal election to be held on November 7, 2023. Proposed amendments to the charter of the City of Commerce City concerning the modernization and standardization of publication requirements for legal notices, ordinances, documents, and other legal publications. Your vote is open. Councilmember Douglas?
I'll be an aye, please.
Motion carries unanimously, 8-0 with one excused absence. Next up is going to be Ordinance 2514, construction standards for residential driveways. Does anybody on council have any questions? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion second to introduce Ordinance 2514 by council as seated and approve on first reading. Mayor Pro Tem?
So moved.
Councilmember Noble?
I'll second that.
I have a motion second to introduce ordinance 2514 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Noble? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2514, first reading of an ordinance amending section 21-7205 of the City of Commerce City Land Development Code to add construction standards for residential driveways. Your vote is open. Councilmember Douglas?
I'll be an aye.
Motion carries unanimously 8-0 with one excused absence. Next up is going to be ordinance 2516, review and approval of early grading permits. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Seeing none, look for a motion second to introduce ordinance 2516 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Mayor Pro Tem?
So moved.
Councilmember Noble?
I'll second that.
I have a motion second to introduce ordinance 2516 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Noble?
No, thank you. I'm
No
sorry.
request for discussion. Will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2516, first reading of an ordinance adding section 21-3219 and amending section 21-3200 of the City of Commerce City Land Development Code, allowing for the review and approval of early grading permits. Your vote is open. Councilmember Douglas?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously 8-0 with one excused absence. Next up will be ordinance 2515, foundation only permits and extension as building permit types. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Councilmember Noble?
I don't. I was going to. Never mind.
Seeing no request for discussion or questions for staff, we will look for a motion second to introduce ordinance 2515 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Councilmember Noble?
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Second.
I have a motion second to introduce ordinance 2515 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2515, first reading of an ordinance amending section 21-3210 of the City of Commerce City Land Development Code, adding foundation-only permits and extensions thereto as building permit types for review and approval. Your vote is open. Councilmember Douglas?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously 8-0, one excused absence. Next up is going to be ordinance 2526, marijuana business regulation update. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion second to introduce ordinance 2526 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Mayor Pro Tem?
So moved.
Councilmember Madera?
Second.
Have a motion second to introduce ordinance 2526 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2526, first reading of an ordinance retitling Chapter 8 and repealing and reenacting Article 2 of Chapter 8 of the Commerce City Revised Municipal Code pertaining to the licensing of medical and recreational marijuana businesses. Your vote is open. Councilmember Douglas?
I'll be a no on this one, please.
All right, motion passes 7-1 with one excused absence. Next up is going to be ordinance 2533, recognizing a portion of ARPA funds. Does anybody on council have any questions for staff? Seeing no questions, look for a motion second to introduce ordinance 2533 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Mayor Pro Tem?
So moved.
Councilmember Noble?
I'll second that.
I have a motion and a second to introduce ordinance 2533 by Council Seated and approve on first reading. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Noble? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2533, first reading of an ordinance amending the 2023 budget of the City of Commerce City by recognizing a portion of the city's total $10,505,025 American Rescue Plan Act funding allocation in the amount of $3,075,000 and authorizing the expenditure thereof. Your vote is open. Councilmember Douglas?
I'll be an aye on this, please.
Motion carries unanimously, 8-0, one excused absence. Lastly, we're going to have ordinance 2536, CDOT grant for DUI enforcement. Does anybody on council have any questions? Seeing no questions, I'm looking for a motion second to introduce ordinance 2536 by council as seated and approve on first reading. Councilmember Dara?
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Second.
Motion, and have a motion and a second to introduce ordinance 2536 by council as seated and approve on first reading. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, will the clerk please read the title and take a roll call vote?
Ordinance 2536, first reading of an ordinance amending the 2023 budget of the City of Commerce City, Colorado by a recognition of the Colorado Department of Transportation grant in the amount of $15,000 for driving under the influence DUI enforcement efforts and the authorization of the expenditure thereof. Your vote is now open. Councilmember Douglas?
Aye, please.
Motion carries unanimously, 8-0, one excused absence. That concludes all of our ordinances. We'll move on to administrative business. First up, Mayor Pro Tem has a discussion item for alley upkeep in the city and adding them to owner's property. Mayor Pro Tem, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Commerce City's Land Development Code is designed to promote health, safety, and the general public welfare. Many of my constituents have complained about the unkept and poor care of the alleys in the south area of Commerce City. This is a constant problem, especially at the alleys located by Rose Hill Elementary and Central Elementary School. They have witnessed used drug paraphernalia, and now homeless people are sleeping in the alleys behind their homes. There are also RVs parked in the alleys, and they have requested and asked, why can't the alleys be combined to their property to solve this problem? This occurred years ago for some residents in Commerce City, and I know this for a fact because when my parents moved here in 1969 on East 60th Way, the alley was split equally for the homes along East 60th Avenue and East 60th Way. This also occurred through other south areas of Commerce City. So I know this can be done, so I moved to direct staff to have a study session for the mayor and city council to look into adding alleys to owners' properties and/or other options by the end of September.
All right, I have a motion directing staff to hold a study session to discuss adding alleys and other properties to owners' properties in Commerce City by the end of September. Is there a second? Councilmember Dara?
Second.
I have a motion second directing staff for said study session. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Ford?
Yes, thank you. Years ago, when this was done, I was on the council, and a lot of the properties that abut an alley chose not to move their fences back, therefore creating a situation where some moved their fences to the center line of the alley, some did not, so then it was impassable. And the ones that did not move their fences back left this vacant space that created an unsafe environment for people to hide, people to try to evade the cops, whatever, on foot. And it's about time that we try to clean that up and get people to have to take that property on. But leaving it vacant and chopped up with fence lines that have encroached upon the alley and others that haven't, I think creates a hazardous condition for the people that live backed up to those alleys. So I'm on board.
Is there any other discussion? All right, I have a motion second to direct staff for a study session on alleys in Commerce City by the end of September. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And next up, you wanted to discuss the Sand Creek Regional Greenway Partnership event sponsorship.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Next, the Sand Creek Greenway Partnership's mission is to promote curiosity and provide equitable opportunities to experience wilderness in nature. They are hosting their annual fundraiser, A Night on the Greenway, August 19th. Proceeds will allow them to offer free outdoor activities and programs to Commerce City residents and those that use the Sand Creek Community Trail. It will also allow them to fund and install trail enhancements, and one of them is also located in Commerce City. Last year, Commerce City donated $1,250 for this event, and this year I'm making a motion to increase the amount to $2,500. It was already in the budget for the $1,250, so I'm requesting the increase. And the reason is for the increase is that the Sand Creek Greenway Partnership is adding, like I said, that additional trail. They assisted with the Northeast Transportation vehicle to provide Commerce City residents with the electrical vehicles. And I have a long list of so many other things that they are doing and continue to do for Commerce City in respect for time, such as upgrading the signs also on the trails in Commerce City. So I'm making a motion to increase the donation amount by $1,250.
Councilmember Madera?
Second.
I have a motion second, increase the donation to the Sand Creek Regional Greenway Partnership event from $1,250 to $2,500. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, do a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-1 with one excused absence.
I have one more, Mayor.
What's that?
I have one more
One more what?
request. What is it? Can I not?
Not on the agenda.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, next up, marijuana moratorium discussion. Last council meeting, we had about 10 people discuss an issue with a business that is trying to open a dispensary within the city. Does anybody on council wish to direct staff to make amendments to either code that would allow that business that has already put forth an investment in the city to continue with their property? Okay, Councilmember Noble?
I would just like to know, was this the only business in the pipeline? The only marijuana business in the pipeline?
Mr. Roberts said he's going to double check their licensing database just to make sure.
Okay, and had they been approved by the licensing authority for Commerce City?
I do want to clarify, there were no licensing applications in the pipeline. This is, the discussion, the last meeting was about businesses that had applied for various land use applications. I believe the one at issue was a subdivision and development plan, and none of the businesses had contacted the clerk's office to initiate any licensing applications.
That's good to know. Thank you, that's all I wanted.
I'll have Mr. Roberts clarify if there are other businesses in the same boat.
Nope, you're absolutely correct. We don't have any applications in the pipeline as of right now.
Councilmember Noble?
I'm sorry, that's not clear. There are no, does that mean that there are people who have been approved, but by licensing and are now going through land development or community development somehow?
No, ma'am.
Okay, good, that's all I wanted. Thank you.
Okay, so to clarify, this particular business has been in the planning process, going through for how long?
So want to clarify that because we did do some due diligence. They made a pre-application on July 5th of 2022. They did not submit their actual development plan and plat until March 2nd of 2023. So once they were within our process, they received their referral comments on April 18. They then resubmitted the application on July 14, 2023.
Okay, so they submitted a pre-app a year ago. That pre-app to go through the land use process has not been approved yet. And because it hasn't been approved yet, they have not submitted their actual marijuana license application.
And I think there was some, I don't want to speak for them, but I think They started with the entitlement process. However, their zoning already allows for the use to occur under our existing standards. There was never any dialogue or interaction with our licensing authority and or staff to be able to understand, in order for them to be able to move forward, regardless of their application, they needed to be able to submit to the state and get approval of the state, and then to submit their application to our clerk's office. So those two are mutually exclusive as it relates to their ability to actually have been approved for a marijuana business.
We think there was some miscommunication among a variety of parties, is the bottom line. Because normally, in normal course, the businesses interested in opening marijuana businesses contact licensing first. And there's a letter of intent and a pre-application meeting, and none of that occurred with respect to these businesses or individuals. They went straight to planning.
What was the source of this miscommunication? Did anybody in planning department inform them that they needed to contact and apply for the marijuana license as part of the process?
Looking at the comment response letters and the pre-app, it was recommended to reach out to the clerk's office to discuss other practices and processes. I have not individually spoken with staff in planning. This is just purely review of the documentation that was initiated through the process.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. And I have a few concerns because I don't know why they didn't speak up sooner about this when it's already on the second reading it was. And then also, I've been working on this since October of last year. And just to remind everyone, there is 5 stores already in Ward 2 and 7 in Ward 1. So, you know, I'm totally not in support of this, and I'd like to keep it like it is. Thank you.
Okay. Do any council members wish to make a motion at this time? All right. No other administrative business items were on the agenda in the call for special meetings. No other business may be discussed without unanimous consent from all 9 council members per Charter Section 4.23. Given the fact that all 9 of us are not present, that cannot take place. Therefore, I'm looking for a motion second to adjourn the meeting. Mayor Pro Tem?
So moved.
Councilmember Dara?
Second.
Have a motion second to adjourn the meeting. Is there any discussion? Seeing no request for discussion, do a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously, 8-0, 1 excused absence. We are adjourned.